Amanda not here there.
Yeah, Amanda and Alex are not with us today. Well, Amanda's gonna be joining us a little bit later.
Okay.
Alex is not with us today. Yeah. Okay, we have 2 articles right now, and then we're gonna need to do a brief caucus just so our team can touch base on 15 before we present that, but it should be.
Okay, sounds good.
You can hand out 13, we can go.
Let's go.
But
Get a bunch.
yeah, I have too many.
There's a few.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, I always like over.
that's better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not enough.
Yeah. Oh. Okay,
You went over there?
yeah. Okay, so our counter proposal on Article 13, I know we had this discussion before about Juneteenth, and now that we have at least one financial proposal on to thank you. We did want to add back our proposal to add Juneteenth as a paid holiday for less than 12-month employees who are still on contract on that day. We do feel that it's important, this is a federal holiday and it's an important holiday. We do feel it's important that employees who are scheduled to work that day, who are still on contract, be paid for that day. If it is a financial consideration for the district that to not have that be a paid day, then the calendar can be changed so that employees are not working beyond that date. And I know it has been a desire of the district to start the school year earlier and contracts ending earlier, so we would be open to that as well. But we have heard from employees that it is a hardship that they are scheduled to work and then they have to not work on that day, not get paid, and then come back and work later into the summer because of that. And so we feel it's important that if people are on contract that they have that as a paid holiday. In C, we are accepting, we're all in agreement on proposed language to change this language here from compensable status to on a district paid leave. And then other changes in this article are just accept the proposed changes to lettering. And that's all we have for 13. Any questions on
I don't think so. Anybody on our team questions?
I think on Juneteenth, I have a quick question. So I heard you say that you would be open to changing the calendar for those employees that would be impacting. What if they were, so they wouldn't want to just shorten that calendar, right? Wouldn't be open to that. They'd like to have more time in front.
I think-
is that what you're?
Yep.
Can you elaborate? Okay.
Yeah, because I think, I mean, from what I had heard was the desire long-term is to change the school year to start earlier. And so that their contract would end sooner and before Juneteenth. So,
And I do think for those few employees that it applies to, they would appreciate some lead time before students arrive, rather than staying an extra day at the end of the year because they're not paid for the Juneteenth holiday. In other words, if their contract would terminate earlier, they would come back earlier and get ready for the school year, but still keep the same amount of contract days. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, for everyone at the table, I think it's important that the salaries are based on a total number of contract days and it's annualized. So it's not like they're a day short of pay in the event that it's unpaid. I'm just
Right.
clarifying.
it's like I work on Friday, don't come in on Monday, but then I now have to come in on Tuesday for one day or something like that. That's the part that is a hardship for people because of the way that the calendar falls, but they're. You see what I'm saying? Because it's now a non-contract day.
This year, the 19th is on a Thursday, and we have to come back on Friday for our next day.
Right.
And this would be mostly like Oz. That would
There's sort of
Yeah.
happens.
And I think tech support, there's a handful of that. Any other questions on that?
Look at the calendar.
Yeah, me too. I just-
I'm gonna try and pull out the right number. Hopefully I get it right. Okay, are we ready? Yep. All right, so for vacation, our desire here with this vacation article is to align with what we're seeing, in other districts. And so here in A, we have, comparable, this is pulled from PPS's. So, and I'll just kind of let you look at this table. It's based on years of service, days of vacation. So for employees who have worked for less than 1 year, they'll start with 10 days of vacation. 1 year to less than 5 years, 15 days. 5 years to less than 6 years, 20 days. 6 years to less than 7 years, 21 days. 7 years and greater, 22 days. And that's where vacation caps out for Portland Public. So we like to look align with them. They recently negotiated their contract. In B, we have just a quick wording change. We're moving from most recent date of hire to initial date of hire. We had some confusion over what most recent date of hire meant. So we wanted to make that change just for clarity. In C, we have a little strikeout here. This is also for some clarity, and I'm gonna jump back and forth between C and G and explaining some of the changes we have here. So we talked a little bit about the vacation rollover and accrual process. Currently, our process is that employees can accrue like up to double their vacation. And then once they have double their vacation, they can use a process of being paid out for vacation that they can't use. Like they spend it or they can get paid out a portion of it. We had that outlined in G, and in reading through it, we felt like the wording was a little bit unclear as to how they get paid out for that, whether that's an automatic process, whether they have to reach out to somebody to have that done. And so we wanted to make sure that it was very clear to the employee how that process was happening. And so that's why we have in C that any vacation days that would be above the maximum accrual, which is double, remains double, would be automatically paid out to them in their July payroll. So that kind of takes out the guesswork there for the employee. Also, it was unclear whether, and with the current contract language, whether they would immediately begin accruing more vacation once they dropped below the accrual, which we don't believe is the current practice. So with the current contract language, it makes it sound like if I were at double, spent down some of my vacation, then I would immediately get more vacation added to my account mid-year. I don't think that's the process. I think it gets added at the beginning of the next year if you're down to below double your accrual. And so, since we don't believe that's the practice, we removed that from the contract. Any questions on that?
It's worth talking about that too, if the practice is not what we're imagining. We're actually thinking that this language that's in the contract might have you out of compliance with the contract in a way that we don't find helpful.
Yeah. If you are restoring people's double accrual mid-year, that's cool, but I don't think that's what is happening, so.
Yeah, I think I definitely would like to hear more from our team about what a practice has been, and then just kind of trying to process the language, so G looks like, and I'm just thinking out loud. G looks like a scenario where you get paid out because you wanted to use your vacation, the district disallowed that. And as a result, you went into forfeiture status, right? Is that how you guys read that?
Yeah, but G is kind of like unnecessarily complex and it's hard to understand. It feels like hoop jumping, where essentially like if someone's above their accrual, we just would like them to just get automatically paid out instead of it being this complex.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concern I would see or the difference would be, we want people to use their vacation. And right now, they only get paid out if they are trying to use their vacation in the district's not letting them, so they're going into forfeit mode. Under your language, somebody could elect not to take vacation ever, and then just routinely just use it as almost like a bonus system. Like, I'll just never take vacation, I'll hit my max, and then each year I'll just get paid out an amount. And I don't think we want, I think we want the vacation so it's used, not so it's like an economic side account. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's a shared interest that our members use their vacation. So certainly on that point, I think you're making a good point, and we're happy to see the county.
Yeah, I don't want it to be unnecessarily complex, that's for sure.
Our interest in getting rid of G and putting this language in C was to, bring your practice into contractual compliance, but then also make it easier, more automatic, less complex for our members to understand. But it is a shared interest that our members, use their vacation. I don't think it was our intention that they be not putting in for vacation at all and using this as a bonus fund.
Right, okay.
The current G language doesn't accommodate for an employee never requesting vacation. It's only when it's denied by the district. And we would prefer that the district not deny the vacation, let them take their vacation. But the scenario you were suggesting where the employee just never asks for vacation is not accounted for in G.
I agree, but up in C, if people hit their maximum accrual, they simply don't get any more vacation. So
Yeah,
there is no payout provided for in C. G is the only payout that's provided for, and it's conditioned on I asked for a vacation but was denied it, and so I get paid out. So I think the default is you just don't accrue any more vacation once you hit your ceiling. And then G is an exception to that. And so your proposal would switch kind of the model to once an automatic payout once I hit the top, regardless of why I was exceeding my threshold. So I appreciate hearing the kind of interest. That's kind of what I'm poking around for, because the language is a little bit cumbersome and I don't want to get bogged down in the language as much as I want to hear where you guys are trying to go with this. So, I mean, I'm glad that we have a shared interest in having people use the vacation instead of just kind of bank it all up and use it as a payout. Because that's hard for business office too, to know year by year, like that's kind of like an unfunded liability hanging around if we're gonna just start paying that out just as money instead of vacation.
Yeah, I don't think that we'll talk in our caucus room about that. I don't think that it certainly wasn't our intention that our members be able to use this as a bonus fund. And I think you'll see as Kira moves into F, it very much with this article is our intention to make it easier for our members to take their vacation. We want our members to take their vacation.
Okay, thanks.
So wording change, well, in D, we have a change to bring this article in alignment with other proposals in the contract. Same in E, moving from probationary to initial hire period. And then in F, this change here, I'll read the language. Vacations shall be scheduled through an employee's immediate supervisor, and the district shall not impose blackout dates We have a strike through of language, and then down below, employees who wish to appeal a decision about scheduling a vacation may do so to the appropriate district level administrator. The reason for the removal of a lot of this language here is, previously this language states essentially that 12-month employees should schedule their vacation during regular school breaks. So, summer break, winter break, spring break. The issue that we feel that are running into with that is that we have a lot of 12-month employees who are essentially all trying to take vacation at the same time. We also have a lot of significant workload that needs to be done during the summer months, and we can speak to the importance of that work that needs to be done. That's a lot of our building maintenance, a lot of our technical maintenance that needs to happen during July and August. And that's critical work that needs to be done for the maintenance of our schools and programs. So when we have all of our employees kind of like, you all have to take this vacation at this specific time to not, because we need to support our schools, what happens is all this critical work that needs to be performed doesn't get performed the way that it needs to be done because we're all taking vacation at the same time. And so we have a backlog. What we would like to have happen is that the employees who have this vacation are able to take the vacation throughout the year, so that instead of us all being gone simultaneously, we're gone when we actually want to be gone and need to be gone, and that we can keep our work going on a rolling basis. And I think especially if we are having vacation time that is in line with other districts, there's no way we can accommodate this level of vacation in the summer months. In addition to us being told to take vacation predominantly in the summer, we also have departments who are imposing blackout dates during the times that we're told to take vacation. So like I could speak in tech services, we're supposed to take vacation during the summer, but also the month of August, we have multiple blackout dates, blackout weeks during the month of August, so we can't take vacation for the portion of the month of August. So it leaves us most of tech services taking vacation in the month of July, right? So I think the more sustainable plan for the district is to accommodate vacation throughout the school year and to not deny it as it happens throughout the school year, even though there is an impact on the schools and we know that. The greater impact is when we can't get critical work done during the summer, and then it just gets pushed and never gets completed. So thus our proposal, and if anybody else on team wants to speak to that, I will. No?
Keep looking at me.
Well, I mean, you're the only other person on our team.
I completely agree. A lot of people, don't like taking a vacation in the summer. They want to take one in December, they don't want to take one in December at Christmas time, and they want to go somewhere in the summer. And to me, I don't think there should be, as long as you have staff to cover or to get the work done, it should be taken, you have to take it in Christmas break, spring break. We have the vacation. I'm gonna say, like me, I didn't use a lot of my vacation when I first started in the district because it was important that we have security on time. And matter of fact, they let us roll over all our vacation for the first year. And that's when I started being told, you gotta use your vacation or you're not. And I just think that if you have a vacation available, you should be given the right to take it if there's. I think that's every position.
Also for custodial services, like stripping floors and re-waxing them takes more than a couple days. It takes a significant amount of time, and if every single custodian is off in July, then you can't do any of that ongoing intensive maintenance and deep cleaning that would, I mean, I'm not a custodian, but I worked in the area in the past, and I just know like stripping and re-waxing a floor takes a couple of weeks. And if you have all the custodians forced to take all their vacation in July, then you can't do those things that need to happen.
Thanks. I have a couple questions, maybe other folks on the team do. The language as you've rewritten it, would it still contemplate needing supervisor approval to take vacation? And I guess it's implied by employees who wish to appeal a decision about scheduling a vacation. And I ask because there are periods of time, let's say it was more opened up to the entire year. Like hunting season is traditionally a big one where you might have a huge number of people requesting vacation. And it's like, you can't have every single person be gone in a department, you know, at that point in the year. So some people are gonna get denied that request because there's, like you, TK, I think you said, as long as you have staff to cover, then a vacation should be approved. So clearly you guys are contemplating that if we have too many people requesting on a given day or week, then some of those folks might be denied. Sounds like it.
Yeah, we believe that the language scheduled through an employee's immediate supervisor means approval, and that's how it is now. The rest of this language is, again, like kind of just unnecessarily complex, like because an immediate supervisor is going to use operational need to approve or deny vacation.
Mhm.
And those needs are kind of different between departments, and I think it's better handled that way than having a kind of guideline that doesn't make sense.
Thank you. My second question. Harry, you were talking about the blackout dates piece. If you weren't being confined to like summer, Christmas, et cetera, then wouldn't it, and if you want to think about, I'm not asking necessarily for a immediate answer. Wouldn't it still make sense to be able to have blackout periods during the year? So I hear what you're saying, that if I say to you, I want you to take your vacations during the summer. Oh, by the way, this big period of the summer is blacked out to vacations. That's kind of a tough message, right? But if you can take vacation throughout the year, and tech is having a big, like, software, you know, something's going on. And so we say, hey, for these 3 weeks in August, I don't want anybody taking vacations. It's all hands on deck. That blackout date doesn't seem as onerous when you're not being kind of isolated to lots of time throughout the year for vacation. So maybe that's more an observation.
I mean, it doesn't seem onerous unless like your kid's getting married that week.
Sure.
Or, you know, you have a funeral out of state to attend, or, I mean, your vacation time is your vacation time, and you should be able to use it when you need to use it, and to be arbitrarily told, we're just not even gonna accept a request this week, because we're not gonna consider it, is, I think rightly, employees have strong feelings about that.
Sure.
And I think as an employer, you do well to consider those requests and not just set up arbitrary blackout dates.
Yeah.
I mean, I think our teams can handle and cover for each other when they need to, and I think people like to look out for their coworkers and cover for each other when they need to, and evaluate requests as they come in, and I don't think it needs to be set in stone that we're gonna have a blackout period.
Mhm.
I think when requests come, you evaluate them and see what your staffing level is and see if you can accommodate them.
I'm assuming that they're not arbitrary, right? I mean,
If there's some operational need that you're expressing there, but the example that you used, it's an all hands on deck situation. We can't lose a single person
Yeah.
in a department. I think we find untenable. Why? Because someone's gonna get sick.
Sure.
How can you not lose a single person? You need to be better staffed. Certainly, we feel like there isn't a period of time where a department can say like, no one. Don't even give me a request.
Mhm.
Like, if there's an operational need where you can't lose any, maybe you can only lose one person, that's totally reasonable. But an operational need makes a lot of sense, and for supervisors to be weighing those needs, it makes a lot of sense. A blackout date is to say that you're not well enough staffed to be able to withstand someone taking sick leave or some other kind of leave too. That's a tough place for you to be in operationally. For our members to be told that it does feel arbitrary, even though there might be some operational needs that make sense there. You know, you gotta be well enough staffed to withstand sick leave, and that would also then mean well enough staffed that you could take a vacation request.
Yeah, I think I want to be a little bit better educated on where we're having blackout periods and why. So I'm gonna hear tech department, sounds like they're having that set up. And do you know if there are other departments that?
Yeah, I think that's part of the concern. I think, from what I'm hearing, departments kind of make their own blackout schedules. They're not consistent schedules.
Okay, thanks. That's the question I had. Anybody else? District? Great, thank you. You guys needed a few minutes for that.
Yeah, I don't know if you would like to present your articles or you'd like us to caucus and bring back 15.
Yeah, if you wanna go into your, I mean, we're at 11:15, so we've got time before lunch, if you wanna go into your presentations. And then we can caucus for lunch.
Well,
Yeah.
it's called flexibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't have a strong preference one way or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we have ours printed out and everything, so, I didn't want to interrupt your flow if you were wanting to.
I mean, it's gonna interrupt the flow if we leave.
Yeah.
Let's just.
Okay, yeah, keep moving, that's great.
Sure. Yeah.
Have people that-
Yeah, we can just pick a point.
Yeah, we're not allowed to move it.
Does everybody have that one? I'll start us out and Carol is our Article 20 guru, so she's gonna jump in and say to me where I need it. I'm gonna, some of this will be a recap. I'm probably just gonna go a little bit deliberate. I'm trying to refresh my recollection to where we left some of these things and where we have differences still. I have to admit, I didn't, read this over and over during the summer. So I lost a little bit of my recall on this. So, I'm just gonna kind of walk through. I think that, if we're comparing this to your last proposal, A1, obviously, A1, A2, A3 are all the same in our two proposals.
Yeah.
A4, I believe, is the same through A, B, and C. I'm trying to see now down to that paragraph, these routes require additional training, including, we have transporting students with disabilities. I think we're in just different order, ODE, approved training programs. We say for accurately implementing restraint and seclusion, and you said for preventing restraint and seclusion. Is anybody on our team kind of an expert that can explain that word difference
Yeah.
there?
And I think we wanted preventing and accurate, because we want to obviously prevent, so I think we left that out by accident.
Okay,
So
for
sorry about that.
preventing and
Yeah,
accurately.
preventing and accurately implementing restraint and seclusion, because obviously our first thing is we want to prevent it, but there are times where we do some really specific training where we might have to accurately, for that particular student, do some restraint or seclusion. Very rare, and it does happen, as we know, so
Okay, so we may have a modification to our proposal
Yeah.
there.
we just wanted both, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Down to 5 midday routes, I believe it's the same. We both proposed the striking of activity routes. Shuttle routes, I believe it's the same. There's activity routes showing up again. Also the same. This is a modification to our proposal in section 8. I think we had talked previously about wanting to retain some flexibility if we went to some other method of route assignments. You had expressed a preference for this language to sort of mirror what is current practice, I believe, in the department, so we've now accepted that language, and I think that is. Unless you catch something, I think that is word for word your language.
It does look that way. I'm trying to see if there's some.
I think we changed to meet with the supervisor to match the section where that same language shows up in 9.
Thanks, Hannah. So it's 8B, if you're not selected for a route, you may request to meet with their supervisor, and that's similar to 9B.
Our proposal was for a request a written explanation.
Right, and so I think we were looking at the new and open routes language in the next section. And it also talks about when 2 or more employees want a new or open route. The employee not selected may request to meet with the supervisor, so we were trying to have commonality between those two concepts. So there is a slight difference there in 8B. 9 new and open routes, I believe we were already in agreement on that section. 10 students requiring special accommodations, I also believe that we were in agreement. 11 trips. So B1. 11B1. That now is the same, I believe, that adding those dates in between July 1st and June 30th annually. And the reason for each charter bus is the same. Which the district does not provide funding. I think that was your proposed language. That's now the same. I think where we continue to have a difference that for us, we're gonna need to find some resolution to is this idea of the summer trips and for us, the differentiation between those and actual charter situations where we're making a choice to use a different type of bus. So we really, and Carol, you can correct me, I don't believe we had a problem this summer with not having filled routes.
Yeah, we filled the routes.
So you didn't have to go into a contracted services.
We
type
did not
of
use
scenario.
any charters. Excuse me, we did not use any charters last week.
Yeah. But I think it still is a concern of wanting to resolve, what do we do if we literally don't have drivers, our own drivers to drive trips? We don't feel like that should be a charter situation, feel like 2 different scenarios there. So that language you've seen before. Assigning trips, section C.
But just before you
Yes.
move on from that, because it's a big one, so if I ask questions.
Yeah.
That probably makes more sense. Can you help us find a way so that we can, when we're obviously looking to protect our members' work. And given that you haven't had to use this recently, we certainly want to find a path with you where we can come back with something that gives you what you need, which isn't much,
Yeah,
but also protects the work that we're looking to protect.
and I think if I'm remembering some of the concerns you expressed before, and if I'm not stating them correctly, then let me know, but it was one concern was, well, the district could just artificially staff at a lower level. We could hire less of our own folks and then say, well, we don't have enough drivers, so we can use contracted services, correct?
Yeah, that's right. There could be a number of reasons that might end up happening. And then you be in a place where you're just contracting out and allowed to contract out outside our bargaining unit. And that's problematic for us, obviously.
Yeah.
That's not the practice. We do want to, when we're talking in our caucus room, be able to craft a counter proposal that it gets closer, right? And it gets you guys what you need, which again, isn't that much, but also we are looking
Yeah.
to protect that kind of egregious situation. We don't imagine it happening, but we would like to protect against it. We don't love the contract allowing for something like that to happen.
I mean, I'm assuming, Carol, help me here. I don't want to, it's always dangerous to assume things, right? But I'll go ahead and do it anyway. I mean, if we have X number of routes, if you have 100 routes, you're gonna try and hire at least 100 drivers.
If I have 100 routes, I'm gonna try and drive 130 drivers.
Yeah.
Because people get sick, people need time off.
The new route pops up
Right.
out of nowhere.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm trying to think of a way to get at your concern without saying, you know, the district will have at least 130 bus drivers, because obviously that's a need that fluctuates over time, depending on number of routes, but I'm trying to think of a way where it could be assured that we're not gonna do this through a lack of adequate staffing, like, a lack of adequate staffing, unless it's posted jobs that go unfilled, right? Those we could control. Like if Carol says we need 130 bus drivers, we've got 120 and we've got 10 openings posted and we're just not getting folks. You know, I don't view that to be the fault of the district. It may be a larger systemic issue of, are we paying enough for bus drivers and things like that? Sure.
Is the need something you would describe as like irregular and or emergency in nature? Like, is that a direction we can go with the language that might work for you?
Not necessarily. I mean, another example, this isn't drivers, but another example that maybe brings some assurance. We have 3 open mechanic positions. We've had 3 open mechanic positions. Well, I know we've had 2 for at least 2 years. We've never contracted out that work. We just sucked it up and make it work. And so and it's because we're not staff, we just can't hire.
No.
I think that. What do I think?
I mean, it would be unexpected or unforeseen that we had to do this.
It would, I think,
I mean, and to be clear, this and what you're proposing speaks specifically to drivers, so I know you're using a kind of different example, but it wouldn't apply to mechanics, it just applies to that one class, right?
Right.
And I'm assuming that that's just because like you need a lot of them, and
I think that part of it too is that has transpired over the years, is the need of students have changed. Programs have changed, right? You know, it's no longer that we take kids to school, we take kids home from school. And so it's always a challenge to keep up, but you know, the part that you're speaking about is like to put something in here, sort of assurance that we wouldn't like understaff and contract out just arbitrarily. And that's what I'm kind of playing in my mind, and I'm thinking of the best way to word that, and I don't know. And I do have a couple of questions that I need time to go back and look in the contract, because I was thinking there's language someplace else about contracting out, but I can't remember because I've bargained like 4 of these now.
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is there's some amount of like, there's some amount of unexpected, irregular, and potentially emergency situations, which are a little different than something unexpected or irregular. I think we would find it somewhat reasonable to be talking about things that are totally unexpected, that, right, to be able to do this. Also, you know, we don't want irregularity of the use of this, and that has not been your practice, so that is another place that we potentially will think about going.
I think it's hard because part of me feels like, well, we don't even need this language because the general notion of contracting out allows this in my mind. So for example, Carol's mechanics issue. If we had open mechanic positions and we couldn't fill them and our bus broke down, I believe under Oregon law, and we didn't have the staff to cover it, we'd be allowed to take our bus to Joe's mechanic shop to have it fixed if we didn't have our own sufficient staffing. I don't think Oregon law would require us to simply go without having our bus fixed. It's very similar to with our license group. We have SLPs. If we can't hire enough of them and we have kids move in who need speech and language services, we'll use contracted service providers if we don't have the capacity internally, because otherwise students wouldn't receive services, right? So what's muddled this is the interchangeability of the term charter with this contracted services, and our worry that, well, this seems to limit us to 12 trips. So that to me is what's confused this is, are these charters? I mean, I was here when we bargained this. It's not really what we were thinking of when we talked about charters. So the 12 limitation to me was never intended to apply to situations where we literally didn't have the staff to cover. It was when football team's gonna go to state, so we're gonna hire a big boss.
And I agree with that, and to feed off of that, I was just thinking, and I'm just talking out loud as I'm processing this, is just. Maybe it would be clearer if this was in 5A, and just broke this up, because I think, because I do agree with Brian, I think it's like we get stuck in that charter thing. And people forget that, right, when it was originally written, it was intended for that
Yeah.
big spectacular event has happened. Let's do this, it'll be fun for the kids. And we kind of miss some other stuff.
Let's start contracting now.
So that might be. a
It's
better
Article
way to
28 on page 63, and I was just gonna ask, like, so. In my mind, and you'll please tell me if I'm wrong, but this language exists in transportation. Because it doesn't fall under Article 28 in contracting out, or does it? I think you have some rights in contracting out. Brian, to your point. I'll take a look at Oregon law around this, but we do have a recognition clause that does protect our work, protects. It protects from you going to outside services for mechanics and for other parts of our classification. There's obviously caveats to that, including the use of subs, the contracting out language in Article 28. But all of those are processes of mutuality where we have some amount of protections or process that we can use to protect our members' work.
You know, one of the things, I'm just sitting here, again, the wheel is spinning. I think that if you were to go and look at transportation's overtime, I think that, and not just this last year, but go back years. I really think that that is a way to show and to validate that we aren't interested in going out. I mean, what this one department pays in overtime to be sure that kids get where they need to be reflects. You know, because if we were in such a situation that Michelle would say there can be no overtime, we would be in a position that either we would have to find somebody else to do the work, or we would have to just not provide service.
I definitely
know
think
with
to your
that-
point, like what you're saying is like you have no intention of using it. We would love to. We would love to codify the intended use of the thing that you need. Without creating a hole in the contract that you're not saying that you need, right? You're telling us you don't need a hole this big in the contract. Actually, you need some allowances for things that you're not able to prepare for. You don't know are coming, or emergency situations. You know, this isn't part of the contract you're currently using very much. We certainly want to craft a counter that comes back to you so that you're able to do what you need to do. But also, this is a very large hole in our contract that we would like to put some walls around and protect.
If I remember correctly, the reason why it's in the transportation and outside of Article 28 is that immediate need. When we need it, having that right of doing it, making that decision. They need to contract because there's this field trip, there's the need to provide the students with something without going to the whole let's meet, it takes time. So I think that's why it's in a different transportation versus.
I think also the needs of students has changed. I mean, I keep going back to that because it's like we could literally have a child under various DHS, McKinney-Vento, specialized program that could be placed in a program in Bend in California. And it's our responsibility to get them back and forth. And with those populations growing, I mean, you just don't know.
You can't plan. for it.
Yeah, you can't.
So having that ability to immediately take the decision is we need to contract out to take an event.
The thing I keep coming back to is that I don't see that we need this clause from your side because we're not using it. And we wouldn't want to really use it because we don't want to contract out. We want to use inside services as much as possible. I understand that the contracting out article takes months and it's too long for these emergency situations. But the walls that we were trying to put around it is that just saying that it's just a free for all. Just contract out whenever you want. Is not something that we would want in the contract. So if there is a situation where you have, a need that is not met by the current staffing levels through no fault of your own, it seems like that's something that the union would just want to talk to you about and, isn't there a process where you can contact the union and say, we're gonna need to contract out for this because we have a McKinney-Vento student who's placed in Bend and we're gonna have to hire, you know, a taxi because we can't schedule a route to Bend, Oregon and we.
I think
It doesn't really make sense to me that there'd be a big hole in the contract where it just says, those are not charter buses. We can do whatever we want, but I don't believe that you're actually using this. And I haven't heard really a scenario where the current configuration of the contract without that number 5 wouldn't cover the situation. Field trips, we cover everything from within the house and yeah, it's overtime. But it's still less expensive for the district to pay our current employees overtime than it is to contract out. Because we have our own buses and then when you contract out, you're paying for the bus too, and it just costs more.
There's a way to describe the situation that you're talking about. More specifically than this current contract language, where it's just a situation where. You don't have available district drivers. I think we will work in our room to try to forge that path to something a little bit more specific that gives you what you need to operate. Without, the one example that you came up with, if in 10 years, a completely different group of administrators decided to nix overtime, all of a sudden, you're contracting out a ton of people and our members are losing work where it should be more of our members. If you wanted to say, we can't do overtime anymore, we would certainly say, you're gonna have to hire more drivers. But this language as is would not require you to do that or have a process of mutuality with us at all about it.
How are you making this work now without this language?
Well, I think my advice to the district would be to fall back on Article 28, Section D, which says the district may subcontract a temporary need for work, period. We have an allowance in the contract to subcontract if we have a temporary need for work. So I would say, if we have a summer route, we can't fill it, we've got no district driver, that summer route's only going to exist for a relatively brief period of time. I would say we have allowance under Article 28, Section D to contract that and not have to go through a process because and again, I go back to the only reason I feel like we're introducing this. So then I think your counter argument could be, well, then why do you even need this language if you're saying Article 28, Section D applies? It's only for me because this notion of charter buses has gotten convoluted or intertwined with contracting out. And again, to me, that subcontracting and charter buses can be the same thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So that's, yeah, if we didn't have this language, I think we'd fall back on D and say it's a temporary need for work and we can subcontract for that. We can also subcontract for special or technical skills. We have to put a new roof on a building, we can go hire a roofing company because we don't have that capacity in our.
That temporary need, the word temporary is not in B5 in the transportation section, right? I mean, that word alone
Yeah.
offers some amount of protections around this.
Yeah, okay, that's good feedback.
Go ahead and continue. Thank you for this is a good.
Yeah. I do get the question of, well, why are we pushing on this if we hadn't needed to use that? I understand that. I mean, I guess I would kind of throw it back to you guys. You are often propose things where it's like, this isn't a problem now, but it could be with a different set of supervisors and
Totally fair.
we have to deal with that argument or account for that, right? And so we do try and account for things that aren't currently happening, but might in the future.
Yeah, and we don't want to seal you off from having the ability to do something you might not currently need, but you could, you
Yeah.
could.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I appreciate the conversation. I understand that the issue of contracting out is kind of an intense one for unions because it's kind of like, you know, dangerous, slippery slope to go down, to go that route. So I get it. We're not announcing a desire to start, I want that on the record. We're not announcing a desire to start large scale replacing your bargaining unit members with contracted services.
Thank you. Thank you for
Not,
that.
Got that in
not
recording.
yet.
Nope,
We do appreciate that, absolutely.
I think to the past, whenever we had the short staff, like the staffing where we're at now, is amazing, and transportation is doing really awesome work with the people that they have and the overtime they're doing. But had we been at that short staff place and not had the law in there about the charter, then instead of going through the process of increasing our pay for the people that we're trying to hire, where we did that before the bargaining thing happened, we would have been just depending on charters if this had been in here, and we wouldn't have increased the pay, we wouldn't have gotten the staffing we have right now to continue to maintain us.
Yeah.
Right, and so like, putting that in there would have hurt us just a few years ago.
I understand that concern, but, and Michelle's probably gonna say the same thing.
Say charters are extremely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we would still be very highly.
You would hope, but,
Yeah.
but would it affect our workers' pay or not? That's like,
Yeah, yes, we would have done this.
you would have still done the same
That,
process.
we've done that in the other categories too, besides drivers, so I just wanna let you know. When something's outpricing, definitely, that kind of motivation.
and so I know we're short like three mechanics too. I've heard that mechanics are way underpaid compared to outside, which is obviously school versus not school, right? But also then your mechanics that wanna be a mechanic have to drive whenever we get short staffed. Well, that's like, I'm not gonna be a mechanic at the school if I have to drive kids. I'm not here to work with kids. I'm here to work with this bus engine, right? And so like, how can we function to make that so it's better so that our mechanic people don't have to drive and all the stuff that goes with that, right? Like, I wanna see us be able to fill up just like you do all of your roles. And then we wouldn't have to go to.
And that's a slippery slope because it's not just mechanics. I mean, our job,
It's all the way around.
the purpose, so I tell people all the time, is like. Our whole purpose in being who we are is to get kids from point A to point B. That's what we call our prime directive, right? So that has to be, and it does, it takes a special kind of person, dispatch routers. Me, we can all drive a bus, and I think that that's the level of commitment. When you come into this department, that people take on, and I think that's always what drives language is, right, we don't want to ever have to be in a position, again, I'm saying, we can't serve.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other remaining questions? Did I miss anything when maybe I'm jumping to the end, when I looked at the rest of transportation, I didn't see that we had any other differences in my skipping over something.
The only other one was C7. HCU had proposed the changes to the word return a trip. And we've kept it as refuse. And Carol said that is to match a current system software platform that we use that has that word refuse.
And it's also then it stays in line because it also talks about the number of trips that someone can refuse before they're pulled off the trip list.
Okay, so that's the verbiage that's used
Right.
for me. Everything else, I think, was the same, right, Hannah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
It's here, so we have you guys wanted another one or do.
We could do 21 probably fairly quickly. I'm afraid if we get into Article 4, then that might start taking a while, so maybe we do 21 and then, okay, thanks. Does everybody have, oh, almost got you guys there at the end of the line? Okay, 21, I'll be able to go through pretty quickly, because I think it is a reproposal of our last proposal. You know, I think for the sake of documentation, we give it in writing again, even though, you know, probably seems kind of weird to here's our, same as our last proposal on this. Here's our thinking, on professional improvement. We feel like the proposal that we've made up to this point is a pretty strong one. We've got some significant increases in this area, which we think is a good thing. And both in the total amount and the per employee amount have been increased. And so, for us, you know, we pushed on this one about as far as we're able to, at least in isolation. I think if this remains a priority for your group to go beyond what we proposed here, we're probably gonna need to start packaging it with compensation and insurance and whatnot, because there will be give and take for us. If you're like, no, we want more on this one, then we'll have to start making some adjustments elsewhere to account for that. We're happy to agree to this one in isolation at the current amounts, but anything higher than this is gonna have to be for us within that overall financial conversation. So
That makes sense.
it's not trying to be stubborn, it's just like, we feel like we've hit kind of our ceiling on this one in isolation. And feel good about the increases here and otherwise we'll need to lump it in with those. Michelle, anything you wanted to say on that? You're kind of our mind person.
I would just want to say that we want to advocate, you know, like for staff to have access to professional development. We know that the cost of things have gone up, and so we try to keep that in mind if we made this decision. To think that the value add for our staff.
Yeah, I think especially the per person increase, I think is gonna be a helpful thing or open some access that wasn't there before. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, I think for us, Kentel and lunch is here. I think conversation on Article 4 is gonna take a while. So maybe if we break now.
I think we can break now, lunch, we'll be able to wrap up our 15. So
Okay.
that when we come back, we'll do year 4 and our 15.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Welcome back. We thought that, we coming back would start with 15 unless you're.
Nope, great.
Fine. Sure.
Right, let's go. The equity art. There's a lot of really good stuff.
And we have never.
All right, did that make it all the way around? Okay. All right. So starting with A1.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you before you get going. So I'm just trying to track where we're at with this article. It says HCU counter on the top, but I don't think that we've ever given a proposal on 15, correct? Or have,
I have one,
what date do you have for that? 5/14, thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry, I forgot to date this.
Oh, no worries. I thank you for helping me stay on track here. May 14th.
yeah, right.
Got it. Okay, sorry for the interruption. Thank you.
No, by the way.
So, starting in A1 here. We had a little bit of conversation about the, different length of employee contracts. And we have, obviously classifications of employees that are called 10-month employees and 12-month employees, but the length of contracts are quite different among that group. So we have employees that are called 10-month employees who work a significantly greater number of days, more like 11 months, because they'll work from like the beginning of August through almost the end of June. And so for those employees, they receive 10 sick days, but they're working almost 11 months. And so our proposal in A1 is so that less than 12-month employees who work more than 200 contract days should receive 11 days of sick leave.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah,
So they don't technically work, but I guess I'm asking, do they work in 11 months of the year? Like, are there 11 months, everything but July, they have work days, correct?
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Sorry, just a quick question. Does that include like winter break and spring break too? Do they work during that time?
No,
Okay, I just wanted clarification.
but they have, yeah, more than 200 contract days. And I can't remember, we looked up like which jobs those were, which I can't remember the calendar, but we can find that again.
Okay, we'll work on it. Thank you.
Skipping down to 6. From your last counter proposal, you had added in this language with the new OAR that defines family member. We have removed that. And the reason why is because as we went through this article, there were a lot of places where we would have to add that in to clarify. And we thought it might actually be more efficient to add the new definition of family to Article 2 in definitions. And then that way we could just refer to that throughout the contract. Rather than adding this whole thing every place that it would need to be. So that was our intention there.
Right.
Skipping down to what was previously 8, but is now 7. We wanted to have a conversation about this. So the last time that we bargained this contract, we had a proposal for like a potential for remote work in circumstances where we had employees who were ill, but were able to perform work remotely, that the districts needed to have performed, and they were not eligible for a substitute, or the work couldn't be performed by a substitute. In that conversation, we didn't have a conversation at the table about any kind of hourly time limit on what that work would be per day. And after we had this conversation, the district appears to have imposed an arbitrary time limit on what that would be. So what we are seeing happening is that staff are being told they can only work up to 6 hours per day remotely, which wasn't a conversation that we had ever had. And so here in this section, we've struck the language that this is intended to cover only short-term situations. We do agree that if a person is working remotely, they should be checking in with their supervisor every day on whether or not they're able to return to work. But we don't agree that an employee couldn't work their full shift remotely if they were feeling ill but able to perform their work remotely. being able to work 6 hours or 8 hours seems like an arbitrary judgment, and it wasn't something that we ever discussed at the bargaining table, so we're not sure why that was ever imposed. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if whether short-term situations was intended to cover like short piece of your day, or like this is gonna go on for 5 months or something like that, you know what I mean?
I'm sure in the conversation, we hadn't intended it as a short-term situation, like it's not intended to go on 5 months. And so we were surprised when it was like, oh, you can only work X amount of time, which was something we had never discussed at the bargaining.
Got it.
Okay, moving on to the personal leave. We are proposing increasing from 1 to 3 days per year. And we have a couple of small language changes here. 3 days per year shall be provided for each employee, and when circumstances permit, each will be submitted at least 2 working days in advance. We are striking the language about approved 1 workday in advance and pre-approved by human resources. Our position here is that our sick leave doesn't need to be pre-approved, and our personal leave should be in the same manner, not need to be pre-approved. It's our time to use as we need to use it. And our proposal of 3 days is in line with our licensed colleagues. Skipping down to 1, personal leave can be used in hourly increments, similar to the way that we use our sick leave. If we need to leave an hour early for a doctor's appointment, or if we want to leave an hour early to go to an event or something, we'd like to have the same flexibility with our personal leave. And then in 2, we have here, employees shall be allowed to roll over 1 personal leave day each year to a maximum of 4 personal leave days.
Yeah, I'll say that, the language when circumstances permit, we're leaving in there because sometimes when our members use personal leave as they would vacation, it does permit and absolutely want to give you good notice. But there's a slate of things that personal leave gets used for that are a little bit quicker than that. And some of them are things you might think are appropriate for sick leave, but others not so much. So sometimes you just need kind of a mental health day that might be appropriate for sick leave, but it also might be something that someone's thinking like, I don't actually want to go to a doctor for this. I'm just gonna use a personal day and I kind of need to take it right now. Another one would be like the loss of a pet. A close family member is a pet, but under the law, not in the definition, right? And so when you lose a pet, you're kind of in a place where I need to get some time. And we don't feel like that sort of the use of the personal days should be really subject to approval, though when possible, certainly our members should be able to give you good notice.
Okay, sure.
Moving on to C1, jury duty. We have previous language here that we are proposing to strike, which is that on days when an employee is excused from jury duty, the employee shall report to work provided 2 hours or more of the workday remains at the time the employee is excused. We had some conversation on our team about the mental load of reporting for jury duty and being excused from it, and the logistics of reporting to work after that, and the sub has already been provided, and what work are you able to do, and just whether or not this was really feasible or necessary at this point. So we're proposing to strike that language. Down in D, we're just proposing capital letters for the specific types of leave, and you'll see that kind of repeated throughout this article. For section E, some changes to bereavement leave. In 1, we're proposing to extend the length of time in which a staff member would be able to use their bereavement leave from within 90 days of death to within 1 year. And then in 2, expanding access to bereavement leave to include instances of pregnancy loss. Did anybody else in the team want to children?
I think you're good.
All right, moving on to emergency leave again. Capitalizing emergency leave. Here we're removing the cap on the. It says not to exceed 3 total workdays per year. There was some language down later in the article that allowed for, the human resources officer to grant more than 3 total workdays, so we didn't find it to be necessary to have the cap and the ability to exceed the cap. Down into just clarity of language. We've changed language from employees who have not used all of their accumulated sick leave to employees who have available sick leave. In 3, UCS removing the definition of family as defined in the Oregon Family Leave Act. So again, we'll see family in Article 2, a definition there. Sorry, there's a lot here. And then again, for, this is cleaning up language for family members. Some corrections in 5. Okay, so in 6, we have, in case of a child born to a family member, emergency leave will be granted. Again, we're doing the same thing with cleaning up the definition of family member. Also, one of our team members made the point that family don't always live in the same home, but you would want to be present for a birth potentially. So we didn't find this verbiage here about living in the employee's home to be particularly relevant. Not all families live under the same roof. And then in 7, we added some language about in the case of employees who are unable to work as a result of student behavior, escalation cycle related injury or trauma, emergency leave will be granted. There is a 3-day waiting period for workers' compensation, and when staff are injured, they often are off work for 3 days without compensation, and so we are proposing that emergency leave would be granted to them so that there would be no loss of compensation for those 3 days. Okay, jumping down to parental leave. Any questions so far?
No, I think one thing I'm struggling with is, and this isn't necessarily of your doing, but I mean, part of it is with your removal of the 3 days piece. I wonder how that impacts, you know, there's a couple of these areas in emergency leave where it says it will be granted. Like it appears to not even be discretionary. Right? And so the catastrophe on the employee's personal or real property, fire, flood, emergency leave will be granted. So under the current framework, I would take that to be 3 days will be granted. And I wonder, without any time concept in there, when there's a will be, like, would we have to grant a month of emergency leave or 2 months of emergency leave? You know what I'm saying? I wonder that about, then if it, in case of a child born to, and you guys are proposing to expand, I mean, could I say, well, I need emergency leave for 3 months because my, you know, cousin had a baby and I, you know, or my sister had a baby and she lives in California and I want to go there. But now I have no guardrails and it's a will be. So I just wonder, I wonder how that, I get what you're saying, like where it's a discretionary granting, why have a day limit and then the ability to exceed the days? Totally understand that, but where it's a will be, that makes me wonder how we would manage that or apply that. And I just kind of noticed that as I went through here and looked at, some of them say may and some of them say will. So thanks,
Yeah.
less of a question.
Understood, your interest there is understood too, and yeah, certainly, you know, we have no problem seeing counter on that,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
Okay, moving down to parental leave. We've added in the placement of foster child in the home, which is also in accordance with Oregon law. And then, I'm trying to look back at the original language here, at least 30 days prior to the expiration of the leave. I want to look back to the. I think that the reason for adding at least is the original language was 30 days prior.
Yeah, exactly. On
Yeah,
30
it doesn't need
days.
to be that exact day. What happens if it's like,
Yeah, not 31 days.
right, exactly. So at least 30 days prior to the expiration of the leave, and then an A, just a change here to bring this in line with other proposals elsewhere in the contract, so initial hire period instead of probationary period. And then moving on to H2, we just have a minor grammar correction here, swapping they for there. In I, we have a couple changes here, but we've crossed out the whole section, but we've broken it out into 3 points, which is just to make it easier to find 5 points, sorry.
Right.
Ooh, yeah, there's a lot going on here. 5 points just to make it easier, more readable for our members. And then the actual changes to the language are in bold and underlined. So,
Can you speak to the old leave that was struck out?
the old, I'm sorry, what?
Parental leave, G1 leave that was struck out. Kind of like
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm. Oh. Yes. I think I skipped over that in practice. So. Did anybody remember?
I'm looking through it too. You're asking a good question, Michelle. We're, we certainly will work to get you an answer. I feel like what, if I'm remembering this correctly, and summer memories are what they are. We're not sure, I don't think we're sure what this is kind of meant to do or protect. The 30-day requirement seems to be sufficient.
Are you, Daniel, do you think you're, and you guys want to talk about it, I get that. Or you think you're referring to the coincides with the natural recess or break period? Is that the piece? Because it seems like you would still have to have the request be for a specific period of time, or I wouldn't know 30 days in advance of what do I give you?
Yeah,
guys,
I
right?
think that that's in just inherent in the nature of this leave.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's gonna be a specific period of time.
Right.
So that's like kind of unnecessary language, but then the natural break or recess period is kind of like, well, this kind of leave, it's not like you get a lot of choices.
Mhm.
Right, and you know, I guess it makes some sense that language be in there, given the course of work, and the operational needs, but the 30-day requirement should be enough to kind of figure this out.
Okay.
It's a little bit of hoop jumping language that makes it hard for our members to actually use this G clause.
And while we're still back at G, that it was, did you mention, sorry, that it's parental leave instead of, that we changed that, the heading? Okay.
Yeah.
Paternity leave.
That's right.
Like, did I?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, and I just noticed also something, if we strike B, which we're proposing to do, we lose the conjunctive and, which should then go after the semicolon in A. Or after the last, or actually after the semi.
Yes. After the 17th.
Good catch.
Just, I'm trying to process this and read it as we're talking about it. So some of this is just me thinking out loud, right? Sorry about that.
Go for it.
Okay, so the introductory paragraph there gives you the right to parental leave in accordance with Oregon law. So you'll get an initial period of parental leave. The requirements or the details of section 1 are only if I've extended it.
That's for extension. Yep.
Got it. So because I was thinking, well, shoot, under Oregon law, we can't force somebody's parental leave to be and in conjunction with the natural break in the. So how do we have this? But that's only if like you've exhausted your statutory right and we say, but now we'll grant you an extra period of that leave, right?
Yeah, and the 30-day requirement just seems like enough of a, this is one of those things where it's like 30 days and it must be, not within 22 days of Elvis's birthday. It's like it's been very complicated, right, for folks to use. We do have an interest in our members being able to understand it easily and use it.
Got it. Okay, thanks for going back to that one. Thanks. Bring us back to that.
So we were right?
Yeah.
Long term. And again, so we have sectioned out some of the original language in I and just broken it out into these different points. And in 1, so we have honestly just a couple changes to the language, and 1 just from may to shall, and then in 2, we've just added in if denied, the reason for the denial of the long-term leave shall be provided to the employee in writing. Under J, this one looks very convoluted, so we have it written out here twice. We have the changes in line, and then we have it written out down below what it would look like.
Oh, okay. That's helpful.
That's why it's written this way. So I'm just gonna read the paragraph below. Request for short-term leave without pay less than 5 days will be processed through the employee absence reporting system and reviewed by the supervisor and human resources director for a final decision. The leave request will be considered based on the impact on continuity of instruction and services. All requests must be submitted at least 1 week prior to the date of the request leave. If denied, the reason for denial shall be provided to the employee in writing. And then down in K, we just have the addition of an S, just cleaning up grammatical error.
A question there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I read it from the language. Would it be, the intent of your language would be, or like right now, one of the things that can be considered is employee leave history. But if I'm reading your language, that would not be a permissible reason or thing for the district to consider, correct?
Correct.
Other question, that was my mistake.
Right, under sick leave donation. There's a couple things we wanted to clean up here. In 1. We have prior mention of a form that was available in human resources, which is not the way that we implement this. So employees should contact the union to initiate an application. So we want to have that reflected here.
That's how it's done now.
Yes, that is the process. In 2D, we have the addition of pay leave Oregon here. And then in 3B, we're also striking the agreed upon form because as mentioned, we don't use a form for this. All right, moving on to M, the guidelines for leave donations. We had a pretty robust discussion about the sick leave donation process, the way that we currently use our sick leave days. There are a lot of members who have worked in our district for a long time and accrued a lot of vacation or sick leave that they don't use. And those employees would love to donate those sick leave days to other employees who need them. And we currently have in our contract only the ability to donate 1 day per year. We also have what I believe is a shared interest in protecting our members' sick leave balances, so they're not depleting their own sick leave balances. And so what we arrived at here is that each bargaining unit employee who volunteers to donate sick leave days must sign a waiver indicating that they're forfeiting those sick leave hours and through sick leave donation shall not deplete their sick leave balance below 10 sick leave days. So if you have more than 10 days and you want to donate, you can donate, but not below 10 days. And then moving on to 3, there was some discussion about buildings in the district and what that meant. So we wanted to make it clear that any bargaining unit employee from anywhere, working anywhere within the districts could contribute. So we changed the language here from district location or work site. Moving on to 5. We wanted it to be clear that a bargaining unit employee can receive the maximum number of sick leave days that can be received by one bargaining unit employee is 30 per contract year. Or the number needed to get the employee to short or long-term disability or any other paid leave status. Because the paid leave statuses have changed, whichever is less. And then down in 7, just a couple of wording changes to clarify. Instead of is in need of, we changed to requires. And then we remove not to exceed 1 day at their current contract hours, again, because we have employees who have more than that and would like to donate. Did you want to take it on?
Yeah, I'll take
Thank
it. And yeah, absolutely. And so obviously, with paid leave Oregon, the Oregon legislature has, you know, created a benefit here, some of which our members were paying for, some of which you're paying for as an employer. That benefit is great, and we did want to codify it here. It is powerful, but the system for getting it can be somewhat tricky sometimes, and you don't always get it on time, and so we wanted to make some allowances for that. First, we're proposing that employees shall be entitled to use their accrued sick leave, vacation, or personal days to ensure that they get up to 100% of their usual compensation while taking a qualified leave under paid leave Oregon. It's a sliding scale of what you get. I'm not sure that any of our members would get 100% of their compensation from paid leave Oregon while they're out. So we want them to be able to use their other leave to make themselves whole while they're out. And then should the state or insurance company have processing or other delays to payment, employees can use their sick leave, vacation, or personal days to make themselves whole to 100% of compensation. And then if they and then in 1B, N1B, if an employee receives delayed payments from the state or insurance company after using accrued leave, they may then remit that to you, the employer, to restore a commensurate portion of their used leave. I hope that makes sense. What is happening in some cases, and my understanding is you've gone with an insurance company to administer this, the standard. So probably this won't come up or come up very often. But should you move to the state system, it would come up more often, and it is happening where, because of certain glitches in the system, and this could happen with the standard too, folks aren't getting their payments on time exactly. So if they're out for 6 weeks, sometimes they're waiting 4 weeks to get any payment. Sometimes they don't get any payment until they're done with their leave, in total, and in that period of time, they're not getting anything. So we want them to be able to use their leave to get paid while they're waiting. And then when they do get delayed payments, be able to basically give them to you and get their leave back.
I understand what you're saying there.
It is one of these interesting, unintended consequences from the legislation that hopefully with the administration through, insurance company, the standard won't really be an issue, but I could foresee, certain situations where because of some clerical errors or which is happening a lot with the state. But even an insurance company could get hung up and not be able to submit payment because it's not sure what it should be or something like that for several weeks. And our members basically be like, on this, but should be getting this great benefit, but they're not getting any payment.
For the teams, our practice currently is to default to 100% sick leave if it's available. We want to make sure that
Great.
there's not a gap, that's
Yeah,
for the employee to use if they wish. So that's our default, and we notify them when they request.
yeah, that makes sense, and I think that was our understanding too, thank you for that, I mean, so this kind of codifies that, and then also the ability for the member to. You know, you're like, I got the payments back, but I would actually I would like some of my leave back in my bank to use, that then they have the agency to decide to do that. Yeah, which may have some complications on your end, so we certainly would understand that, willing to hear from your side of the table on. If changes to this language are needed to make it make sense, but yeah. Any other questions on that? Check you guys.
Not on that specifically, I will come back with some more information. I do on the sick leave donation, just want you guys to be aware that for tier 1 and 2 members, like that sick leave is a benefit calculated as part of their retirement benefit as they move through the first retirement process. And so you maybe consider limiting that to officers where that's not a benefit, because I don't know that in the good hearts of our colleagues, they're gonna necessarily think of that when they see somebody need a leave. I'm just gonna donate this, but it is of value for tier 1 and tier 2.
Thank you for that. That's helpful information for us. Yeah. Sure. It's one of us. This is, so I think a lot, probably during the pandemic, this was, negotiated into the contract. And like, kind of the game on this keeps changing a little bit. We want this clause in our contract to make sense for anything for unforeseeable in the future. We're proposing changing absence due to quarantine for individual employees to mandated individual absences during public health emergencies. We don't find it super helpful that it be just quarantine specifically, as we know that there are other things that are happening in the world, including isolation. So in one, we're proposing that when an individual is directed by the district or appropriate public health official to be absent from work for reasons including but not limited to quarantine or isolation, that then they have this extra benefit. And in 1B, they suffer no loss of pay or benefits for a period of up to the 10 work days, provided that such mandated absence instead of quarantine is declared solely for the purpose of spreading the disease to others. And then in O2, changing quarantine to mandated absence there. We think that this, should another terrible public health emergency arise, we think that this language does give our members a benefit that will absolutely be useful if they're unable to come to work because of an impact from that kind of public health emergency.
Great, thank you. It's a long article. Yeah. So we have a counter proposal for you on Article 4. And then we also have, Michelle's got some updated, budget information she was hoping to share with you guys as well. So I think we can go with Article,
Thank you.
Article 4 first.
Yeah, one thing.
All right, everybody have that in front of them, so I get, okay. Walk you through our response on Article 4. I think the first thing I would add before we walk through that is, so as we approach this article, I know many of you know this is a topic that's now heavily regulated by Oregon law, right? With House Bill 2016, we had a lot of statutory language sort of come in where we usually just bargain for those things. So one of our main goals, quite honestly, is to adhere to the law, not add to the law. We feel like House Bill 2016 was a bump up or an increase in some access, some rights that labor organizations had. We accept that, it's the law. But I think when we look at this, we see those, it is pretty expansive. And so one of our goals is to not go beyond what we already see to be a fairly broad grant of rights to labor organizations. So I think another piece for us is to trying to adhere to a fairly complex law, and what do we add in the way of contract language, or how do we make those two things go hand in hand, can be a little bit difficult too. So those were some of the goals that we had looking at this. Starting with A1, I think that was just a move from somewhere else in the contract, if I'm not mistaken. You guys had proposed taking that from F, prior section F. Up, it makes sense to move it here. So I think then a very minor in A2, and making the word type plural, which is fine, makes sense. So we've adopted that. You had no proposed changes in B or C or D, and we have no proposed changes in those sections. Release time, I mean, this goes, the current section E, I mean, I would sort of kind of break this apart. For me, the release time is kind of twofold. One, we're talking about release time for union officers when they go on a full-on release to be a president or the designee or whatever. The other piece of this is the release time now that House Bill 2016 granted to do day-to-day operational stuff. And so we've got that. And the reason, so your new language with the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, et cetera, I think mirrors what we had before, to some degree. Hold on, I'm trying to find it. We had it in prior E5, where we had many of those reasons lined out. I think for us, here's our difficulty in accepting your proposal. Here we're talking about, again, the time that union business can be accomplished on work time, which is a little bit problematic. Again, it's part of the law, but for us, that is time that the work's not getting done. But the law talks about a reasonable period of time, but gives no definition to what a reasonable period means. That's been a gap in the law that we've struggled with in other places. Like, what does a reasonable amount of time mean? The legislature gives us those gifts sometimes, right? Like, you guys figured this out, reasonable amount of time, but we're not going to define that. And so, you know, as we read the current language, the parties had kind of bargained that a reasonable amount of time was that 1,000 hours a year was our version of a reasonable amount of time. That appeared. Again, looking back and forth. Yeah, that 1,000 hours a year in E5. And so for us, your replacement of your add to section E there of that release time language kind of divorces it from that 1,000 hours a year category and leaves us back again with that question of what does reasonable amount of time mean? And your language also omits the notion of reasonable amount of time. It just says shall be granted release time for the following. So that's a predicament for us. How do we define how much time do we have to allow for these various activities? So we've proposed to maintain our current system. I don't recall when you guys presented this, if you had said that you felt like you were exceeding that 1,000 hours per year to accomplish those actions. So I don't recall what you had proposed there.
Let's talk about this, and I have some questions, but I'll say that I believe that the legislature's intent when they were talking about the reasonable amount of time is to say if a member has to do representational duties for an investigatory or disciplinary meeting, for instance, that's covered under the law. And it would be reasonable to attend the meeting, some prep with the member, some work after the meeting, right? But for one investigatory meeting, it would not be reasonable for that member to take a whole week of release. Now, let's say you have 100 of those, okay? And our members are doing a reasonable amount for each one. As soon as they hit this cap, the law still grants them the ability to take a reasonable amount of time of leave for that protected purpose. So the cap in our minds for the things that are codified in the law, to be clear, we still want to take only a reasonable amount of time to do those things that are protected in the law that we attempted to codify in our 1A through H, that list. But there are other things that we will do that would fall within that bucket of those hours, right? We still want to have a bucket. The reason we lowered the number is because that's kind of more of a discretionary bucket now for us, that are things that are not necessarily protected in the law. Some of which were in the contract, like to attend certain trainings and conferences and things like that, that's not actually protected in the law. So that would come into the bucket, which is why we were looking to kind of separate it, because we don't want to end up in a situation where you're counting down the bucket. We use up the bucket, but now you're still on the hook to pay for things that are protected under the law. We would rather have those things just be totally separate. So there's kind of two kinds of release time. At least that's what our intention was with our proposal. So I guess the question I have for you is, what would happen if you ended up in a place where we have used all of the 1,000 hours and there are still protected things that our members have to do as far as representational duties?
Would we allow that to happen?
Yeah,
or not?
how would you end up administering the contract there? Another question I might have is, there is not clarity in the law, that reasonable amount of time is an interesting thing, and there is not clarity in the law about bargaining time that is not right here at the table. We did attempt to codify that in a way that would provide some clarity. And we're totally willing to have a back and forth conversation on what will work there. We understand the law to mean that this time is protected time, the time we're at the table with you. But the law is fairly open about bargaining time. We would not find it reasonable for us to say, we're gonna take weeks and weeks on end to be in prep and that's protected by the law. We don't think that that's the intention. But we do think it's the intention to have some amount of bargaining prep time as covered. And what we don't want to end up with, and some of this came up in our ground rules conversations, is a situation where we're coming into this space for protected time and immediately calling a caucus to take the whole day to do prep. We want to respect your time, and that would be allowable under the law. But we think that that's a bad outcome that we would like to protect the mutuality with you in the contract, so that we just have better clarity about this moving forward around bargaining prep time. That was another thing we were looking to address there. So how, you know, we could continue to address it as we have in ground rules negotiations, but there is this issue where ultimately, if we wanted to, we can show up to these sessions, call a caucus. And then we hate that idea, right? That the law allows us to do that, but that's not respectful of you or the relationship that we want to build with you.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of concepts there. So I guess I'm trying to like figure out in my mind how to kind of address each one.
Yeah.
As far as what would we do if you hit your 1,000-hour cap and some of those things still happen? You know, I mean, I think that's a good question. Because we don't have a lot of contracts that have it satisfied the way we did here, where it's your 1,000 hours and that's considered reasonable. So in a lot of contracts, it says reasonable amount of time, and then it's not stated what is a reasonable amount of time. So I think that's a fair question. I mean, I think that you're right, that the reasonableness, the reasonable amount speaks largely to per instance, or the idea that if you are preparing, you know, if you look at the variety of activities that are allowed here, participate in or prepare for arbitration proceedings. Again, if you were to say, well, I have a union bargaining unit member, and I need to prep them for 5 days for an arbitration, we would probably take the position that that was not a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, that's too much time.
And then I suppose if we had a disagreement, we'd end up at Employment Relations Board or something like that, right? You know, some of these are time bound, and the amount of time will not really be discretionary. Attend investigatory meetings and due process hearings. Well, that amount of time will be dictated by how long that meeting lasts. It's a district run meeting for the most part, right? So that one, I think if the district's calling a meeting and somebody needs a rep for that meeting, they have a right to that person. Even if you are beyond 1,000 hours, they would get a rep at that meeting. I don't think there's any question to that. So I think some of these are more nuanced than others, or open-ended than others, and I think that's where the reasonableness becomes a worry.
There are some like outcomes I think we want to prevent. One is in your 5, which is status quo. We're able to take release time to engage in union sanctioned training, conferences, or advocacy activities. That 1,000 hours starts the beginning of the school year. We know we're going to have representational duties that are covered and protected under the law. That's not one of those things. So what we want to prevent is thinking like we should be scheduling all of our union sanctioned trainings, conferences, or advocacy activities at the beginning of the school year. That doesn't make sense with the operational need, but it would make sense in terms of us being able to use our 1,000 hours for discretionary activities. While then, if we used up all 1,000 hours in the first 2 months of the school year, we're still able to have the rest of our representational activities protected by the law, even if we use through the 1,000 hours. We don't feel like that's a fair way to proceed. That's like kind of bad thinking, but this allows that thinking.
Yeah, I do hear you, and it is a complicated piece. And I think our challenge is not born out of like anti-union animus, just out of the desire to have employees performing their job most of the time when they're at work, right? There's work at the union that needs to be done. We accept that, but our goal is to not lose as much productivity time or work time as possible, right? So, you know, the idea of having that legally protected reasonable amount carve out with a 750 hours on top of it feels like the potential loss of a fairly significant amount of taxpayer paid work time that then doesn't happen. Right?
Can I ask which of these are the ones that you feel like are nebulous, potentially nebulous? Because a lot of these, like, as you mentioned, attending investigatory meetings, those are set by the employer. There are limited time engagement. arbitration proceedings, those are easy to avoid, right?
Yeah,
I mean, bargaining,
I think,
those are again like mutually said, and labor management meetings are set by the employer. Like, I'm curious, what on these lists of things that are in the proposal from us are of concern to you as potential for an unreasonable expenditure of time? Because these are outside of like our full-time release officer, these are things that like other worksite leaders or members of our leadership team would be doing.
sure, I think that probably the one that in my experience has been the hardest to get your arms around is investigate and process grievances or other workplace related complaints. So I've got some districts where HR tells me, I've got a union rep and they're spending like 6 hours a day going around to buildings and asking people like, you have any work related complaints, or, you know, like, you have a grievance going on? Let's talk about that. And that one has no guardrails around it as written. And you guys have just adopted statutory language. So it's not like you created that problem through language.
Right.
But that to me is the number one that the reasonableness comes into, because it's probably the most common out of all of those things listed too, right? I mean, you very rarely prepare for and participate in arbitration proceedings or like legal proceedings like ULPs or, you know, new employee orientation is a one time a year thing. So it's really the bulk, the way I see it, the bulk of the union rep time and activity is kind of that contract management, that talking with employees about complaints they might have or grievances they might have, or I need to investigate this grievance. So I need to take 5 hours today because I'm going to investigate whether or not this is a valid grievance. Well, what if that happens day after day after day? Now I've got an employee who isn't really doing the job that they were hired for. They're spending most of their time on things that we would almost expect the association like president or permanent release person to be doing a lot of that stuff, honestly. So that's the one I think that's the most concerning.
That is good to hear. I may have some more questions on this, but I wanna release you from that section to keep moving.
Well, I mean, no, that's fine. I think that the bulk of the conversation in this article is probably around that concept, right? Because I think most of our differences appear on that topic. Other pieces of release time, I think we've agreed to the language now when we're talking about the union president and or designees shall be granted partial or full-time leaves up to a total of 8 hours per day. I believe that was your language. I'm looking at E4 for example.
Yes.
And then that language at the very end, barring any unforeseen and unusual challenges to the district, the employees shall be returned to their original work sites. Again, I think that matches up with language that you proposed.
There was a piece in hours that was for the purpose of calculating benefits and overtime time spent on union release shall be considered hours worked.
I think that also goes into like, two things, I think. Well, mostly it goes back to that 1A, investigate and process grievances. So, there's a question, I mean, I guess if you spent 5 hours or even 8 hours spent Monday investigating or preparing a grievance, is that really time worked for overtime purposes? From our perspective, that's not. It was not time when you were engaged in your job or for a job for the district. So, again, it goes back to, I think that really that category and whether that should be factored in there.
Okay, but what about attending a labor management meeting or acting as a union rep at a representation meeting? I mean, I don't like, as a grievance officer, I don't have control over when a potential representation meeting would be called.
Sure.
But I do have a duty of fair representation to attend that meeting as a union rep. So if Martha's like, hey, Kira, I need you to come to this meeting today, I don't get to determine that. And if then I'm supposed to work a board meeting that night, then I'm losing out on overtime pay that night. And that doesn't.
You're losing
seem
out on,
fair.
how are you losing out on overtime?
Because that is a deduction of my hours worked, because I then have to put in union release to attend that meeting as a union rep, and then I don't get paid my overtime rate for working that night.
So you would have gotten overtime on that day anyways. But
I
you're
would have
getting
gotten
an hour
overtime
less.
that day had I been at work that full day, but because I had to take an hour out to attend as a union rep,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't my choice to do, but I'm a union rep, so I'm gonna go and do it, right?
Yeah.
I didn't get to set that meeting that day. Now, I'm not getting paid overtime to work that.
Yeah, okay, I hear that
So
one.
we could be working 45 hours a week
Mhm.
and getting paid overtime for none of it because that 5 extra hours is union stuff that we're not being counted as being at work for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question comes down to what amount of that did the district cause to happen and what amount was, again, things like investigating or processing grievances, because from a district standpoint, I don't know that we feel like we should be on the hook for overtime that's generated by work that you chose to do in furtherance of your union duties. I hear your example of attending a representation meeting for an investigation or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the implication in your statement is that the investigation of a grievance is the grievance has no merit. If I'm investigating a grievance that has merit, I don't choose to do that either, and that is important work that needs to
Sure.
be done. Holding the district accountable if there's a grievance that needs to be investigated is important work. It's important that we all follow the contract.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and I'm not intending to put a value judgment on whether that grievance has merit or not,
right,
but it's not district work that we would typically compensate overtime for.
no, I'm not suggesting you compensate overtime for investigation of grievances, but if there is time that needs to be spent investigating a valid grievance, and an employee also during the course of their normal work week needs to work overtime, but also needs to investigate a valid and important grievance, I don't think that they should be penalized
Mhm.
from having to do both in their role as a union representative.
Sure.
They're doing both very important and valid work.
Yeah, I mean, I think embedded in your statement is an assumption that that's an important and valid grievance, and I think grievances run the spectrum. I think there are some that probably have merit to them, and I think there are some that are completely meritless, and it just depends, right? I mean,
Sometimes we have to spend an hour to find out.
And
that
investigating
We're
is-
investigating something that doesn't have any,
Yeah.
And then we
right?
agree
Yeah.
that we can't move forward with that.
yeah,
It's worth talking about, there is a power imbalance that we're always going to try to seek to fix. All of you on that side of the table are in paid time 100% of the time you're doing this work. There's an assumption that we are going to spend some amount of volunteer time doing the work that we do on behalf of our union local and our members, and we do. But if you can imagine someone who does a day of protected union work, and it's just an 8-hour day, and they get to the end of their week, and their manager is telling them they have to do far more, they would be going into overtime and they're not. This imperils us, because it puts us in a position of not just using our volunteer time to do this work, but of exhausting ourselves to do this work, to just try to meet you where you are in 100% paid status all the time.
yeah, I hear that concern. One clarification I would make, because I feel like that comment's been made. Like when we bargain in the evening or something like that, these people don't get paid more. They're not in paid status. You call it 100% of the time, they're salaried. So if we bargain during the day and then, or if we work during the day and then bargain for 6 hours at night, they're not in paid status in the sense we're, you know, and you might say, well, we're not getting paid while we're at bargaining in the evening. I mean, that's technically true for everyone but me. I'm probably the only one who gets paid, you know, if it's 5 PM or 6 PM.
You and I are the only ones in the room in that situation.
So I mean, I guess I just want to state that because I do hear a lot about being on equal footing and so that comment just kind of rubbed me a little bit wrong that they're in a paid status 100% of the time. They are in the sense that they get paid a flat salary, and then if that's a 8-hour day or a 12-hour day or a 14-hour day, that's pay. So I just feel like putting that out there.
No, I hear you there, and I mean, I think that the terms of your employment, obviously with the district, all of you are subject to your own individual negotiations, not being in a bargaining unit yourselves. But in that your salary exempt from overtime, you potentially could individually negotiate some amount of comp time policy or something with the employer so that when you go over 40, that's a possibility. We don't know the terms of your employment with HSD, nor is it our business to know. But we don't want to be in a situation where either the current administration of the district or a future administration of the district is putting us in a position to exhaust ourselves to do the basic functions of union activity, representational work, investigation of grievances. I don't think there's probably an example you can point to where Hillsborough Classified United has used an unreasonable amount of time to do these things that are protected in the law. It's not our intention to either. Both sides of this table need to find a way forward where we can get clarity, where the rules make sense and they don't end up having us go to the Employment Relations Board, right? That would be, I think, the goal.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess that was a question I was gonna ask, do we know if the 1,000 hours has been getting exceeded? Do we?
I was gonna ask, is there tracking on the district side on this? You know, what does that tracking look like? And, you know, what has the number been?
It's something we can definitely look into.
I think that would help, because if we're like just far below. It is important that we say again that we're working really hard to change. As leaders, and it's everyone at this table and more member leaders with Hillsborough Classified United that are working very hard to change the relationship that the union has with its members in whole and to strengthen that relationship. And in that, we are going to have an increase in things that we want to do. We know that some of those things are discretionary, which is why we would like a discretionary pool. And the other things that are codified in the law, I think we'll continue to do and be able to do them with more people doing them in their work sites where it's actually easier for you, the employer, instead of it being like a couple of people who are constantly getting pulled out of their job, right? So there are some definite shared interests here, but let's find out, you know, what do the hours look like? And
Sure.
that might help us.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we had kind of moved down to the leave for the union president designee, and I think we had discovered that we didn't have differences in language over there, or do we? We adopted their union president designee shall be granted. I'm just trying to track where language got moved around. I think you guys had some strikeouts and then moving things around. So probably where we're different in the release time for the president or designee is the language that is in there about the full-time leave of up to 3 years to a union president or designee. That is part of the piece that you deleted, right? Are you tracking? So you're.
Yeah, I'm trying, it is also a challenge because we made so many changes in ours. So, and you reverted kind of to status quo and then inserted some of our language.
That's
You're talking,
correct.
referring to E4, correct?
Yeah, so your language in E5, if you're looking at your proposal from April 23rd, your language in E5 is kind of a replacement for the language that got deleted in E4.
Our E5 was. Yes, correct.
So I'm just looking to.
And it looks like you're accepting those changes to that clause.
Right, what then is struck in the original language of E4, but then doesn't reappear in your version of E5 is that 3-year limitation. So that is still a difference. Oh, no, wait, let's see. That's 12 months, actually. I'm just trying to look at how that transitioned over from the struck language. Yeah,
There's interestingly a reference to 22, 23. that I'm not seeing in ours, and
Correct.
it was it status quo, and we didn't have it as status quo in ours for some reason.
Yeah.
Which might have been
Yeah.
which might have been our error to not include it with the strike, that's.
Yeah, we're accepting it as is, but putting back what was in the original article.
We've added the language that you proposed, but added it to what was current language there.
So,
Yeah, I think that was an error by us, the
Yeah.
strike of the 3 years, please. So I'm sorry about that. I know that we talked about that
you would like to clarify that your proposal in your E4 includes that first sentence,
We would like to
not a
keep it.
strikeout.
correct. We'd like to keep the 3 years. There's obviously some of that language that may not be necessary anymore, beginning 2022, 2023, that little phrase probably is not necessary anymore because that's time bound. I think after a caucus, maybe we'll give you a cleaned up version of this.
That would be helpful, but okay. Can you, on the 3 years, since we're there, can you talk to us about your interests around that limitation?
Well, I mean, I think that's been a long-standing issue that's kind of gone back and forth with different leadership of HCU. That was a 2-year limitation at one point. I think then we bargained a 3-year. I can't remember how many bargains ago that was. People who were here 2 bargains ago. I mean, I think it's goes to that notion of hiring somebody for a given position in a district. We didn't hire them to be a union president. We hired them to be a bus driver, or we hired them to be a educational assistant or whatever. And so then an indefinite amount of time, they then basically left the job for which they were hired and 5 years, 10 years or something like that. I don't know, I think it's a frustration and then to have them come back into a job that they may have gotten, their skills may have diminished due to a passage of time or changes to the job. So if I take a job and then I go on a leave for 10 years, that job might not be the same job that when I come back to it that I took. So I think that was always a piece for us as well, especially in areas like technology or, media or things like that. So, at the end, upon return from the leave, the employee is going to return to the number of hours commensurate with their regular position and proceed on the salary schedule, et cetera. So I think that's been a piece of it as well. Like, could somebody really be absent from their regular duties for more than a 3-year period of time and then reasonably come back into that job as if they never left? And I don't know if Arthur, if I'm forgetting any other part of what our concern was there. Yeah, I think that's been the main parts of it, I think.
This language was here before the new language about being returned. We certainly find it challenging that, to some degree, the district's insertion into union business to say, you gotta go back after 3 years. We have a union president or a designee who's serving in a full-time capacity and things are going really well for us. You were kind of like, why? Though in that situation, I think we would also find it understandable and potentially under the definition of a usual challenge for you to put them back to that work site. I think we can talk about that. And because that like lifting the 3-year cap, someone's 9 years potentially as a full-time release officer, and then having the right to go back to where they started might be a challenge for you that's somewhat reasonable.
I think that's the one predominantly that, I mean, it's not a personal thing. I mean, any given union president, you might really think they're fantastic, or you might find them challenging to work with. You don't know. So it's not just like, we don't want your current person in here for longer than 3 years because we want to get rid of them. That's not the.
We would hope you would not make it a personal thing. But also, it's somewhat reasonable for us to be afraid that if we have someone who is really good at this, that you would force them back to work.
That's what.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's somewhat scary to us. I know you don't want to scare us that way. We don't want to be scared that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it mainly is this idea, we're holding a job here. You know, we hired you into a job, we're holding this job. How long are we gonna hold this job? And you have a right to come back to it again, where you may lose currency of skill. Somebody else may have come back into those positions who's doing a fantastic job. Although, you know, we probably have openings in most jobs year to year, so.
Yeah, I was thinking that, you know, we accepted the language around like returning to their original work site. And so like, I also think about the administrator who is, you know, if you're 9 years, having to do temporary for 9 years, that could be challenging. But depending on that.
Or even if you didn't do temporary, you filled it and you've got a office manager, you've got somebody who's kind of like the backbone of that school. And then it's now, well, they're gonna get moved because we have somebody who hasn't been there for 9 years coming back into that spot, you know, I mean, that's hard to contemplate, I think.
Yeah, that's totally reasonable, concern. We'll talk about.
Okay.
Our caucus room.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's the main issue there.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Talk about the 700, you had a proposal to go to that 750 hours again. To me, that's all bound up in this question of how much time are we allocating for union business and in the statutory amount, and then this extra pool for things beyond the statute. Use of district facilities, that just got moved. Staff announcements in G, we proposed, I think, current language there. Here was our concern with your proposal. It may be that there's language that could help with this. You proposed adding, currently it says the right to make announcements, and adding and/or presentation. You know, for us, that brings a whole bunch of things to mind, that presentations sound a whole lot longer than announcements. And so there's no time limit on this. The union shall have the right to make announcements and/or presentations at employee staff meetings. So if I'm a principal and HCU has a 20-minute presentation on something that they want to give at a staff meeting, I've lost like half of my staff meeting or more. So announcements never really had that feel, because announcements feel like, hey, remember, we've got a union meeting tomorrow at 4 or whatever, or here's where we're at bargaining or something like that. But presentations now feels more time consuming than announcements, honestly. So I don't know if we had a discussion with you guys when you presented that about what you were thinking when you used the word presentation, that there was something specific you were getting at. And I think that's also true with the inclusion of and district gatherings, because that then felt like any district event, there was going to be some time period that may have to be allocated for some level of union business. So, I mean, we started talking about all the possible district gatherings we have. We have retirement celebrations, we have committees, we have other things like, would there be a right at all of those things to have union presentations at? That felt expansive. If there is a specific thing that's not happening that you're trying to carve out language for, that'd be good to hear. Like if it's not as broad as my imagination is making it, it'd be good to hear like, hey, we're really only talking about this, or
Yeah, that's helpful to hear.
because then we can try and address that.
Is there an amount of time that is reasonable, that feels reasonable?
Well, at a staff meeting, I guess I'd invite principals on this. At a staff meeting, I think 5 to 8 minutes is probably all we're gonna want to lose out of a staff meeting, where you're really cooking to even get through what you've got to get through. And how long are your normal staff meetings?
They could be up to 45 minutes.
Yeah,
Trying to make it that long.
You know, how often do the staff meetings happen?
It depends on each building. Like for my building, it's not that often.
Yeah.
But other buildings, they could have much.
yeah, I mean, you get a feel for what the norm is on any level. Is it a once a month? Is it a once a week? Is it a once every 2 weeks sort of a thing?
I think at my building, we already have it like once every 2 months, like a staff meeting. But we
Yeah.
have academic seminar where we can do some of them, nuts and bolts, and then my staff newsletter really addresses some of the stuff that I want to cover at staff meeting.
Gotcha.
I think we have less staff meetings than that, maybe a couple times a year, like we don't really. Staff meetings around. We have active in some of them.
The classified staff.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Michelle.
Classified staff are usually at.
At the academic center.
Yeah, we have a classified staff meeting like once a quarter, so not often at all.
So,
May I ask a question?
yeah,
I just have noticed, since I'm in the library, when the teachers meet for a staff meeting or some sort of academic seminar, if there's union presentations that need to be made, and it's like 1 or 2 slides, it's optional at the end of the meeting. So I feel like that might be why I'm remembering, we just said, okay, if there's a classified meeting, which I just had when before school started, to say at the end of that, or the library media assistant team, like, is it okay for us to also say, hey, optionally, you may stay for 2 minutes. So I think that's what we were trying to say, not to eat up the time that is carved out for the meeting, but just to say, we have, that's what I'm kind of remembering from our summer, you know.
We can certainly have some conversations about like what kind of more specifically we're looking to
Okay.
to do there and hearing five to 8 minutes.
Is what I heard.
Yeah, that's helpful. but-
That's what I would think of as typical.
Yeah, that's what the announcement part is. It's like, you do an announcement in 5 minutes
Yeah,
versus a presentation. Which a presentation is like you have, something to say, you need at least 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, right, it's not necessarily the content, it's the time it's taking up. So presentations felt like a longer time period and we have no time guardrails. So that, I mean, that kind of like, doesn't really matter all that much what you're doing for that 5 to 8 minutes. It's how much of that staff meeting is it taking up, I think.
yeah.
You
totally agree.
underestimate the amount of time I can spend on that.
You have a lot of announcements to make.
I spend time, but okay, all right.
And we may want to present, you know, a QR code and an email link, and just so people know how to get in contact with us, what are.
I think that's.
Those are the kind of presentations.
Yeah, we can talk about
So
it.
if a time limit is what's of concern to you, we can talk amongst ourselves and.
Yeah,
We're hearing your interest there. We'll certainly, if we come back on this one, we'll either be looking to vastly expand the definition of announcement, or we'll put walls around what we mean by presentations.
I mean, just so, this is one, I mean, we struggle with this with license too. We hear a lot from our administrators, like you guys are saying. I get like a staff meeting a month. And I've got so much information I'm trying to dump into the staff meeting, and if I'm now losing a fifth of it or something, then that's a frustration. So we do hear that. Let's see. H, there were no proposed changes. I, information. I believe we adopted your language. The district will acknowledge receipt in writing and provide an expected timeline for the completion of the request. We have an extra, like the district, we have different things underlined and all of that, but I believe it reads the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We both have 2B being struck, personal and work electronic address. We both have moved use of district facilities, and stuff. Already talked about that. What's that? What am I missing?
No, it's that letter.
Oh,
It's a big, yeah, it's a really big deal.
it's a big change there, yeah. Your capitalization.
I know, I was like waiting for something exciting.
Yeah, that's it.
Like what? I think the next substantive piece is down into new employee orientation, where I think out of an abundance of caution, we kind of are falling back on Oregon law, that House Bill 2016, as far as what access looks like. I feel like what the current language expresses there is pretty close to what is written in the statute about if we have a new employee orientation, the union gets a block of time there. If we don't have one, then the union gets access to employees. So
This is another place where we've got to have a conversation here, because we want to do these with you in a way that makes sense for the operational needs of the district. And what the law allows us to do is not necessarily that. The law allows us to interrupt the work in a way that we don't want, and we know you don't want either. And for new employee orientations, I think we've been working very collaboratively to come to something that's closer to what's in our proposal. Frankly, I think gotta find a way forward on this that doesn't have us just like, well, you have legal rights. Our legal rights are potentially very disruptive, and in our shared interest to provide the best possible environments for our students. It doesn't make a lot of sense for us to exercise our legal rights to the extent that we could. It makes more sense to work with you to do these in a regular fashion and in a way that just makes more sense for us too. Like we could, under the law, go and do a 1-hour orientation with each and every new individual and kind of just go and interrupt the work. That seems awful to us. I know it's awful for you. We gotta find a better way.
I think for us, so it sounds like there has been some cooperative efforts, at least on the beginning of the year one, that's happening, correct?
We've set up, I mean, this is a little disappointing because I think away from the bargaining table, we've set up a really great and collaborative process for conducting new employee orientations for this year.
Good.
And I was hoping that would be reflected in this article here. And to your earlier point about not having our union reps away from their jobs a lot of the time, I think that was part of the shared interest in developing the plan that we did collaboratively, was not having our union reps going like one by one out to buildings to do these like one by one new employee orientations with people. Was like, we want our union reps to be at their job as much as they possibly can and to be doing these, you know, in a collaborative way in large groups as much as possible. And so working with Marta to kind of establish that process for this year and hoping it would be reflected in this, in Article 4 here.
So are you looking for the process to be outlined?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we had, I mean, maybe we can
That's where we
workshop it a little bit, but that's kind of, I think, where we were going, with M originally, and I think, you know, we had some conversations off the table to kind of what that would look like. But yeah, because I think that really is gonna be less time for our reps and less time for less disruptive for our
Less
building.
disruptive, yeah.
Way less disruptive for our
What
schools.
we've been working on has been great, and let's codify that. Defaulting to the status quo and the law is
Yeah, I mean, I guess
not helpful.
It's not in anybody's interest for us to go around and disrupt every work site conducting these new employee
Sure.
orientations.
I mean, clearly that what was current in the contract of the law didn't prevent you guys from coming to an agreement on how this would look, right?
Sure, no,
No.
that's definitely true, but you know, we would like, obviously, we're always gonna say like, hey, we would like it in the contract.
Yeah.
Our proposal kind of was moving in that direction, and there were certainly things about our proposal that might not have protected your interests in a way that, sure, come back, but how many new employees do you have this school year? I mean, if it's 100, that's under the law. 100 hours of release time for the officer doing them, plus the 100 for the new employees, that's 200 hours. That's hard, that's not anything anyone wants to go into, right? That's like, let's avoid that, and we've been working on it, so we would love to work on that in a way that gets it into the contract. And
Yeah, because again, I didn't see the contract language as being a barrier to that happening. In fact, I mean, in a lot of respects, I don't see the need for any contract language at all, because the law pretty exhaustively outlines that right, and you guys have come up with your own local way to go about it, which is great. I mean, I applaud that. I just didn't see the contract language as preventing that from happening.
I think I'd love to just not have to negotiate it every year.
Yeah.
To not rework it
Yeah.
constantly and to just have it codified, because it was a lot of work to establish it, and
the truth is, we need the district to do some stuff here
Yeah.
in order for this to work for both parties, and the contract does not require to do anything. right? So it's then on us to exercise our legal rights, and again, that's disruptive. So what we were hoping to do is like, hey, every year, like, help us, get all of our new members into fewer places.
Yeah,
At one time, it makes sense for you, at a time it makes sense, and like, we get to schedule it and make it make sense. So it's easier for you, it's easier for us, but it does require that you agree to do some of that work.
At some point, the contract language probably worked beautifully because it said, if the district conducts an in-person employee orientation, we'll show up and do our in orientation with you. And I assume at some point the district was doing that, and now the district is not doing that, which means we have to do our orientations on our own. And that's greater time and greater expense for us and greater disruption for the schools and for the employees. So we're, if you guys were doing it, we could just tack on to whatever you're doing and it would work beautifully, but to try and engineer something that's not disruptive to schools or sites and is abiding by the law and happening on work time is quite a process. And what we've come to this year, I think, is gonna work really well and hit all the points of the law and be minimally disruptive, but without codifying it, that could change at any point, and so we want to have that codified.
sure.
And we're in a place where if Martha leaves the district, we're like, what does next year look like? And we're back.
I mean, I guess
Thank you for that.
I would say that there may be situations where you change what that looks like, or you improve upon it, or you try something and that wasn't necessary. Maybe we don't have to have one monthly. Maybe that wasn't, maybe it wasn't completely necessary to have a December meeting or something like that. I mean, so I guess I shy away a little bit from rigidity in there, in the sense that you may discover different ways of doing it or change that from year to year. So the other piece that jumped out at me, and it's not just a conversation here, but when we're having other places, the statement that attendance shall be required, I have trouble with, because I don't read that in the statute. And to that, I would ask, what if an employee refused to go to that? Would we discipline them? Would we give them a letter of reprimand because they refused to go to the union orientation? Like, we wouldn't.
I think that's a totally reasonable thing to be asking about, and I think, our intention around that requirement is that more that it not be publicized that it's optional, and that it be paid for folks and that they know that, and that our intention around that requirement, and for you to have an objection to that is reasonable. Our intention around the requirement is we really want, as close to 100% of new employees to do the paid orientation, so that they can come into the union family at the same time they're coming into the district family.
Yeah, and just so you know, how I advise clients is, don't say it's optional, or don't say to people like, you don't have to go if you don't want to, but if you want to, and then don't say it's the last hour of your workday, and if you want, you can leave and go home, or you can choose to go to this orientation. So those are, so
That's helpful.
but not to say, sometimes you have people who object and they say, I don't want to go listen to what the union has to say. I don't want language that makes it sound like the district has to say, no, you will, under a threat of insubordination if you should refuse to do so.
Yeah, that is a fair objection for you to bring up. I think, I'll say that we will work hard to incorporate that into our counter proposals. Having said that, I also do want to say that, like, we would love for you to, we have great discussions in this room. We are expressing a lot of intentions, and in this particular counter from you, we're not seeing a lot of our intentions being preserved as you come back. So we do have to ask, like, we are doing a lot of hard work to try to listen. And then when we come back to you, like, protect the interests that you're stating, so that we're getting just ever closer to an agreement that works for both parties. And I do feel that the need that we have to ask, like, please, like, with some of this stuff, like the new employee orientation, some of these pieces, we're gonna go back thinking we didn't make a lot of progress, because what we got back from you was didn't do really enough to preserve our interests. While you're protecting your own, which you need to do.
And I guess I kind of wanted to get, I'm not sure if it's clear sort of on the record that what we're proposing is regular scheduled, cooperative, collaborative, new employee orientations at a building and time provided by the district, so that we don't have to barge in one-on-one and have these 1 hour orientations with one of our people and one of your people one at a time, because that seems very inefficient.
Well, you don't have to do it that way absent this language. I mean, if there were 3 new people in a building, you could still meet with them all at the same time. You wouldn't have to do it. It's not like without this language, you're reduced to a one-on-one. There's nothing that prevents that from happening.
Well, we don't want to have to renegotiate every year, what building, what time, what day, how many, we just would like to have something that's in the contract that this is the process. And we think it would be helpful for you as well as us. We're trying to help you.
I hear that.
It's also worth stating, like, part of the new employee orientation proposal was, and no, there is no in-person orientation happening on the district. And I work the help desk. I talk to a lot of classified new hires all the time. I would just continue to advocate for some kind of in-person onboarding process for our new hires. I think it would be a huge benefit for our classified staff to have something similar to what our licensed staff receive, where they, even if it's an hour or two, where they just get the same kind of welcome, where they come and meet somebody and get to touch base, and here's how technology works, here's how you get logged into your account. I talk to people all the time where they're brand new to the district and they don't know how things work and they need a lot of help getting set up. And I think the ability to get people all together and welcome to HSD and here's the things would be huge and communicates a lot of value. I understand it's like a financial lift and there's a lot of logistics that go into it. But the proposal here is, it's part a union proposal and it's part like a value statement of like, we value classified and you matter and welcome. So there was kind of 2 pieces to it. So
Yeah, our M1 was about an in-service day, which to us was not something that was necessary in our orientations, but when we went to craft this, we were like, well, what would be the best thing? And literally put the words employees in a position to succeed. And so in our proposal, we really tried to craft what we thought was gonna be the best thing. Whether or not you're gonna be able to do a new hire in-service day and that's financially feasible is a good conversation, and we're willing to have it. We can certainly scale back our proposal to the things that we feel like are most important to us that we need in a mutual process for this. But yeah, what Kira said, that we really wanted to move to some place that was going to put new folks in a better position to succeed and be connected both to the work and their work sites and their supervisors and their colleagues. Yeah.
Going back to the original language was not to diminish your work or to diminish our conversation that we've had. It was, we're doing the conversation that we had about new employee orientation is happening, and having it back to the original language. It doesn't limit or it doesn't extend on it. It's just something that it's a process. And that's what we're trying to also throughout the contract, not necessarily put processes that need to be not negotiated, but talk to if how it works for the next year. So Tiffany, you mentioned something about negotiating the building and it's not going to be the same building. It's not going to be the same times either. So it's having to find that balance probably of there's a little bit of the process, but not the whole process, because it might not be the same. And still keep the law in there as well.
Yeah, we'll do some work to avoid the rigidity that would cost, but we don't want to, we would never specify a building. We have to do things in, right? Or a specific day or a specific time, right?
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about where you guys landed as a combined group this year for orientations, and are there pieces of that feel like they're durable? That is, they could go into contract language without feeling rigid, so we'll continue to have those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
We lost something.
I'll wait till that. Crawl over to.
I mean, part of our discussions are hearing, what are the issues that are the most important to you? There are things that honestly, it'd be our preference not to have in the contract. And part of this process is hearing, what your priorities are. Okay, so if this is a big priority of yours, then we continue to work on it. Our preference would be just to have kind of the guardrails provided for by the law. But that doesn't mean we're not willing to continue to work on issues if we hear from you that they're priorities.
Yeah, we definitely have an interest in meeting with with new employees, our new members, within a reasonable amount of time. And to do that in as few meetings as possible, in a way that is like within the course of work for most folks within their schedule and paid time, right? That I think was our most important interest there. We'll work to preserve that and come back without the rigidity that you're talking about. I think we can do that. Okay.
And I believe that the law had that. So that's why we didn't put any other process in there that we were working.
Okay.
I'm just curious, I'm out of the loop since I work at night, never can, so how often does the district have an in-person orientation? For new hires?
For new employees, it depends on the department. When they're hired into the department, that's when they have.
Yeah, everybody. A job category that I see posted a lot, custodial services. If you have a lot of custodial services employees hired in 1 month, is there an actual in-person? Or is it done online?
By the department. Right.
There is, yeah. I don't go in depth as far as, showing them how to use certain things. But I do spend about an hour with every custodian. We give them their keys. If they need keys from us, we give them, we check their badges. We have a alarm panel that's a dummy panel at facilities. We check their badge, make sure it works, make sure they know how to use it. We go over cleaning procedures, basic policies and procedures regarding using district equipment for your own needs, regarding attendance, all that kind of stuff. So about an hour.
I was there, in my job, I have to use their employee ID number to learn those. And they will probably make it figure out your employee ID number. I don't know it. If they need it in my vision, where do I get in that? And I have to go into it and I have to actually go form set up on my computer. But I just read all the information on how they exactly get your vision. And so I was just curious how often the in person that goes
I think
over.
with what you're talking about, honestly, I've worked here for 34 years. I didn't know what my employee ID number was until the new alarm system.
And I know.
So I
back
think
there,
that's-
an issue where I thought their employee number started. What
about your transportation? Yeah.
That our intake, we actually have intake. They actually have two. They have them during the hiring process. Just because in Buckeye, there's so many steps, you have to go through to get licensing. And then when they start training, the trainers spend, I think, it's like 4 hours they spend with them. Going through the employee handbook, going through all that stuff.
And I know my stuff, we try to do, they do a day for 5 weeks. And then a new employer was spending like a couple of years ago, I spent 3 weeks with the guy who did training. And we went over it. And it's nice when you have that, those coworkers to lean on. But at the same time, you got some stuff that look like stones. Like, what do I do to paint harmony client? I'm just going to. That becomes an issue.
I think we want to approach this in a responsive, differentiated a way, because we do have jobs that people have, like there are many people that do it. And I also think I found some notes to myself when I first started this job and what I wanted to accomplish and those kinds of things. And then now 10 years later, different because my depth of knowledge has changed and the questions I'm asking are different. And so I think we want to make sure that we're providing supports to people, as they see fit, and also if they're ready to take on. Because I know when we do like onboarding, and we do these orientations at the start of the year, people will come and say, what's my number? Or how do I get into my insurance benefits? And how does that all work? And so I think we're just trying to, it's like an accordion, kind of like bring it in and let some room be there. Person can have the opportunity to learn. And I think, we're always trying to make it better, and it's never perfect, in terms of how we want it to be. But I think we really want to be responsive, and we want to be, differentiated, in how we're helping, because we want them to succeed. Because I think the portable knowledge that people come in with, I may not know all of those things, but that portable knowledge is something that's gonna help them and that they're gonna bring to their work. And that if we can thread a needle on that, it's gonna help them want to return the position.
And I agree, I just don't think past by the listening sessions and conference employees are like, I don't know if I can. What emails is he use, it's like. You should know where it's.
I think there's a saturation point that people have too, and they're just like, I can only take so much more information.
Well, there's simple things, like we use the term immediate supervisor a lot in this contract. I did not know who my immediate supervisor was until last year. We had a conversation here that classified don't supervise classified, classified are supervised by hire, and then certified is that are not over our SCA. It's like,
Right.
we didn't know that. The people who told us what to do were who told us what to do, and we went to them to ask our questions. So once you get into the contract and you go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Why is she making that decision or whatever? So those kind of things, when we have a union meeting, we can have conversations about that wouldn't come up in a normal conversation, even in a district hiring.
When you look at the studies on retention, the first 6 to 12 months of an employee's work at a new employer is key. And the more anyone, their supervisor or their coworkers invest in them, the more likely they are to stay long term. We want to make that investment in new employees, and we're hopeful we can find a way to do that with you.
Great, thank you for that conversation. Anything else in Article 4 before we, it seems like otherwise we're gonna move over to Michelle presenting some, I think that's next on our agenda. We may need
Take
one
a
thing.
break.
Yeah, let's take a little break.
Yeah.
Like we did, stand up.
That's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's not what it's like the one because
You
you're.
get it done, right? They did it done. Okay, so yeah, we're all here.
Yeah, she had to step out. Okay.
Welcome back. I think, are we back?
Yeah,
Awesome, welcome back.
we're back. All right. Next, on our agenda, Michelle Morrison.
Thank you, everyone, for letting me be on the agenda today. I do want to bring to you some information about our budget. It's an update. And it's a little bit more detailed than what I was able to provide to the board at the August retreat. Kara, think you were there, possibly? No, it was a day when I was not, you were not there. Okay, sorry. So it'll be new news then, probably for you. And the board will also be getting this level of detail at the work session next Tuesday. So we can go ahead and get started. Thank you, Hannah. In my agenda, just for reference for you guys, 'cause we'll be sharing these slides afterwards, I was trying to put in links to the prior stuff. Hopefully, just so it could be like, what, could she say that before, or what did that happen? And so you have all of that information linked here as well. I'm gonna give an update on 23-24. It takes us a little bit of time to close out the year, so I'm gonna talk about that. I'm gonna talk about what that means for 24-25, and then it's kind of a sneak peek of the upcoming biennium. All right, this is a slide that I brought to you guys before. It's a reminder about kind of some high level context for our budget. So it's provided by K-12 funding in the state. We are funded at the state appropriation level set by the legislature for a biennial period. Going into 24-25, a lot of federal support that we've received the last 3 years is gone away. And so that you guys are probably feeling that. We're definitely seeing an impact of revenue as our enrollment declines. We every year have kind of hoped that it's going to stabilize, and it still continues to decline. So we were impacted pretty significantly in 23-24 because of that. In Hillsborough, we have a 4% fund balance. I know that it's different for every district, and I know you guys are probably familiar with the status of other districts around us. So that's very low. That's very low. And it's something that we maintained low in order to spend current year dollars on operations. Our budget is 82% payroll and benefits. So that's the people. That's you, that's me, that's the people. There's very little savings to be had when we're talking about services and supplies. It's really anything that happens to our budget usually happens in that 82%. And our budget assumptions are revised as our actuals occur. So we, just like you do it at home, we set our budget, not our guideline for the future. And as information comes in, those assumptions around the budget have to be adjusted accordingly. If you're not getting the same level of revenue, you can't spend the same amount of money and you're in trouble pretty quick. And again, any negotiated items in excess of our budget, it's going to create a gap that impacts staffing and services. All right, so we don't have our final audited actuals yet for 23-24, but these are some things that we do know. For the revenue, we received a pretty sizable negative state school fund adjustment in May for the prior year. So that was for 22-23. The way the state school fund works is that we estimate what we think we're gonna have in student enrollment. And then in May the following year, if we undershot or overshot that, we get an adjustment. And we receive a negative adjustment because we assume our enrollment is gonna be flat. And what that also means for us is we have to adjust our assumption for 23-24. And so as we're coming in on what we have as our actual revenue, it's significantly less than what we had budgeted for. On that side of the equation, our over expenditure areas, regular salaries, as our town employees know, in June they receive 3 paychecks, and that covers 3 months of pay, July, August, and September, and as well as employee benefits. We also have a lot of other bills that don't come due until the very end of the year. And so June, we realize about 25% of our expenditures, 24-25 in the month of June. So it's difficult to determine much before the end of the year exactly where we're going to land with expenditures. We did experience some savings in other areas, but these are the big ones that we went over last year. Regular salaries, extended contract, and other pay, and with all of those go associated payroll costs at about 35%. So that creates a pretty significant, that's all part of that 82% of our budget, the biggest part. The other area was substitutes. And then out of district tuition for students, we spent quite a lot on placements because we were required to. to serve those students. So those are, you can see how the equation is going wrong on both sides. Less revenue, more expenditures. Okay. So for this year, first year of the agreement that we don't have yet, we've had to adjust our revenue assumptions again for 24-25 for enrollment. We're adjusting our expenditure assumptions based on the 23-24 data. So all of those increased costs that we experienced, now we have to apply those calculations to our assumptions that we made for this year's budget. What that means is that our current year budget is not balanced. It is in the red. I haven't brought a number forward yet and probably won't until October, late October, because then I'll have our enrollment numbers and I'll also have 2 months of payroll, so that'll help define that. Just a couple of graphs to, I don't know, break up the words, but you can also see the growth here. These are our costs. I didn't know if I should put it in there by percentage and ended up going by category. So each one of those, you can see the blue is salaries, orange is associated payroll costs. So again, that's that biggest portion of our budget and it's all people. And then you can see the 300s include substitutes and utilities. So we pay for everything all year. Out of the 300 category, 400 are supplies. You can see that everything has increased. And then 600 would be dues and fees and really our liability insurance has gone up quite a bit. All right, so that's on the cost side. Back to the enrollment and revenue. So in 24-25, each student is a single weight and it represents about $11,000 for the entire year. Our students with IEPs, we get an additional weighting for them. So they're about $22,000. And then our English learners will receive an additional half weight. There are other types of students that brings weight, but in Hillsborough, these are the big ones. I just wanted to kind of show you the trend in our enrollment declining. The projections, again, I'm projecting they're gonna flatten out. That's what I think, optimistic, because that's not been the case in Hillsborough or the state. You can see our English learners and students with IEPs. Our students with IEPs have declined slightly, but our English learners have gone up a little bit. So that's kind of the story in terms of student enrollment in Hillsborough. We went through October so far of 23 with actual data. Anything, I should put a line there. To the right of that is just projections. And this is just really colorful and scribbly, but again, it's on a percentage basis, plus minus. You can see where our students, again, with IEPs have declined and then they're kind of went back up over the last little bit. And our English learners, it's just more granular look at the same information, but the alarming part is the blue line, our total student enrollment going down. That's it for 24-25 today, and I'll be bringing you guys more information as we move through the bargain. 25-27 outlook. So we're really thankful that Governor is looking at $11.3 billion is accuracy for current service level. That's a significant increase. It's almost $1 billion more than what K-12 gets today. Very encouraging. One of my concerns is that the PERS rates for schools are anticipated to go up an average of 4.08%. We will get our actual rates later this month, but that for us is significant, and it means even at $11.3 billion for the state, we will still have reductions. So that's based on all of the assumptions that I've shared with you guys about payroll and benefit increases. Next steps, again, I'm just trying to show this with you guys, kind of the budget planning that's going to be happening. And that our advocacy, when that's gonna be happening. And hopefully we'll have our bargaining outcomes prior to staffing, that would be ideal. The sooner the better for sure for everyone who's waiting. And that's kind of the budget. Any questions about next steps or when to expect more information? Any questions about any of the information I shared? I know it was a lot. No.
Did we have a hard copy of this presentation?
Ideally, you would.
Okay.
Again, I always wait until after so that you can not skip ahead necessarily. But I'm available to follow up with you after if you guys, sit on this for a day or two and be like, hey, we have a list of questions. We can start a Google Doc and keep going back and forth.
That's good, 'cause we may have questions that aren't really appropriate for the money. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
I think that takes us through, what we had on the agenda, at least scheduled. Up till the caucus point, so that seems like the thing to do.
Yeah.
Agreed.
You got a check-in time in mind where maybe like we just touch base at, 3 to 10, you want to just touch base in an hour and just see where we're respectively at?
That feels.
That feels right.
That's
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll start digging into what you guys presented today and see where we can get. And we can touch base and see.
Yeah, maybe before we get that phase and say like, okay, we're good to go.
Yeah,
And then-
yeah, that sounds about right. I think, yeah.
Okay,
Sounds great.
all right, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody, welcome back.
Thanks.
Sorry.
All right. Are we ready? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna start with 21. Hopefully we're very close on this one. We have accepted your proposals as far as amounts in fee. And the total amount of the maximum fund, we just had one addition here, which was spelling out 60,000 letters, because we have that elsewhere.
Sure.
And then in D, after a short sidebar, we have a proposal here. As much as is practical, the district shall schedule required training during employees' work hours. If such attendance is required outside the employee's work hours, the employee shall be paid at the overtime rate. So this is for any kind of training that is required for an employee's job that occurs outside of their regular work hours.
We thought that might be a good place to land in between. We heard you that there are certain things that are required and have to be required. And that the district doesn't necessarily have control over when they happen. And so that's why our use of as much as is practical, so like, try to do it within someone's work hours. But then if you really can't, the time that's outside their work hours should be at the overtime rate. We think that that's really fair. We do have some members where it does hurt to be working outside their normally contracted work hours.
2 questions. What the examples that we shared of the safety care and maybe the transportation, are we on the same page that when people are not in those situations, when they're having to go to training outside their regular work hours, that it's within the confines of your language here.
Yes, I do think so, and so the one example was 6 hour a day, employees needing to do 2 8 hour day trainings in a row. 2 hours each day would be at the overtime rate, otherwise it's work hours. There are other situations where people have to do a weekend that normally they wouldn't work. Could absolutely be required, and it would just be at the overtime rate. We do want to make sure that the district is doing what it can to schedule those during folks' work hours, which is hence the, as much as it's practical language.
My second question, I don't even know how often this would happen, but if I'm a 40-hour-a-week employee and I had to stay 2 hours after my shift to finish a training, am I getting paid the overtime rate, or am I getting paid time and a half? Time and a half.
That's a great question. And my brain is not finding whether or not we have a proposal on the, do we have a proposal on the table that already addresses 2 time and a halves? I thought we did. Though I'm not sure that we have, or it's work that we've done.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't wanna give too much of a teaser for later, but there was some discussion of overlapping overtimes, and we either have brought forth a proposal on that, or we will, that kind of addresses how that would work. For a kind of a differing rate, but that is a separate proposal, so. If that's, you know, that might interplay with this, but should that not go forward or be accepted, this would just be an overtime rate. I think in that other proposal, and we'll speak to that at a different time, we would love to see that folks get a double time rate if they have 2 overtimes that are interacting with one another. Normally 1.5 times twice would be 2.25. But we're gonna propose a double time rate if there are 2 overlapping overtimes, and that would address that.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
I have a question too.
What about those, like, for transportation, that they have to have required training? That is during the summer, in order for them to do their job? How do you see that played here? Also paid overtime?
Are these required state trainings?
Correct.
Then, yeah, I would say it would be paid in the overtime.
I think you would also have the option to. You could probably we could talk about that some, but I think you could also do an extended contract. You could expand certain days in the contract potentially to allow for that. And then it's plannable and not, you know, I think the intention here is that like. Time outside our members' planned contract time is what should be in the overtime rate, because that's a hardship for our members. They're either working at a time that they're not normally working at, or on a day that they're not working at.
Yeah, sometimes with those, we don't have control of the dates. So it wouldn't be easy to just extend a contract because it's right in the middle of summer or something like that. So.
Yeah, we do think that we understand that might be a hardship for the district. It's certainly a hardship for the members, which is why we're proposing the additional rate here. Yeah.
So just to clarify, because I want to get it straight in my head, which is a little tired right now. So for summer classes, like we have to have them posted by April 1st, so people know in advance, and then they sign up for the ones that fit their schedule. That would be at the overtime rate, because it's outside of their bus driver, transportation assisting contract.
Yes, under this language, yes is the answer to that question, so contemplating that. Yeah, I have to say yes, because the way this language works, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, my question would be for staff that work less than 40-hour weeks. That would, you're saying, unlike if they were covering or getting an extended contract for covering someone else's shift, that they would get overtime even though it's less than 40 hours a week.
This is speaking specifically to required trainings. So
if they work, their normal shift is 6 hours a day. And in a situation where they're covering for someone else, they would just get a regular hourly rate for that time. But for specifically for required trainings, they would get overtime even though they're not exceeding 40 hours.
That is correct. If they're
Okay.
required to do a training that falls outside of their normally scheduled work hours and dates, and yes.
Other questions on our team? Okay, thanks. Yeah.
I mean, you want to stop
Are you ready? Okay. All right, we really hope we're close on this one. We have, just a couple small changes. We really heard, and need a desire to have consistent language between 8B and 9B. So we've changed those to be consistent. So to in 8B, we have a written explanation from immediate supervisor if an employee does not get the annual route assignment that they requested, and then in 9B, we've changed that to also be a written explanation from their supervisor about factors affecting the decision, so those two have consistent language there.
Yeah, when we'll say on that, like, when we had talked about it, you would express the interest there, them being the same, and, so we heard that, that's why we're coming back here, making them the same, we don't hate a meeting, but we do like written explanation better, and it potentially saves everybody a little bit of time too.
And then in B, after a sidebar and some conversation at the table, we do, I think, have some agreement that, the language in contracting out is probably going to be more effective for the temporary work or driver shortage for trips. So we've removed that language there. And then I believe we're in agreement on everything else in this part of it.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and thank you for a productive sidebar on the contracting out issue. You know, we did think we had a way forward with that, but also it was, a lot of, verbal acrobatics that was probably unnecessary, given that.
Yeah.
I think after the conversation, it was kind of like, yeah, you probably have what you need in Article 28 on contracting out, so.
Yep, I agree. I think we're in a good spot on that. Is there anything more that you can talk about as to why the written piece is preferential to a meeting? I mean, is it that people like to have a record of it, or like what is it about it in writing that is important to you?
I could address that, too.
I personally want a written record of anything that happens between my supervisor if it's some sort of meeting or something. Working with it, I work in, and then the MS I work in. If you don't document, it didn't happen. And to me, that's the way I was through my career. So I think a written record is important. And, you know, I've seen supervisors say, well, we never had a meeting. It didn't happen, we didn't talk about this. So I always ask for the way you notice after the meeting, a summary. And, oh, good, but I think it's very important to have written record.
Additionally, let's say I wanted, a certain route and it was up in the mountains and it required chains and I didn't have the chain class. And so the written explanation would be, well, you haven't taken the chain class and, you know, even though that opportunity was provided to you. So then I know what I need to do to potentially next time maybe get the route I'm asking for. In other words, it gives that employee a written record of, you know, these are the things that you as a driver need to work on in order to be considered for that route. It's very helpful for the reasons that TJ stated and also to give the employees, you know, like both posts.
It's always good to have clarity between the supervisor and the employee, that what the supervisor thought they said is what the employee received.
Yeah.
So having a verbal conversation between the two is great, but having it in writing so that the employee later is like, well, my boss told me this,
Yeah.
this, and this.
Yeah.
But we can look at the email that was sent and say later, okay, here's what was said to me.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, TJ you probably quoted stuff I use in my training with supervisors all the time, which is if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. I wonder about the volume. So I don't know, Carol, like how many, you know, on a yearly basis, how many.
It would mostly affect. Well, the major route assignment is definitely fall.
Yeah.
And we typically don't, I mean, it depends, but typically we don't have a lot of people. Because of the fact that we do the survey, so we already know, you know, kind of what they're doing. Yeah. They would depend, yeah, it just depends from year to year.
Right now, it doesn't feel like you have a high volume of people wanting to know why they didn't get a route that they didn't get.
You know, this year we didn't, I was just trying to think, because I'm not the only one that does it, so trying to think, but I'd have to check for a fact with the other supervisors, but not that I'm.
We would certainly hope if we're 10, that 10 emails would be less work for a supervisor than 10 meetings. I mean, that would be our hope, and then in the meeting, things get said that, as you said, like, if there's no written record, like, then we have to take notes about what's in the meeting, and
Yeah.
right? I think it's easier just to send an email or get something in writing
Yeah.
to someone that, and to Tiffany's point, it's really great to know what it is. If it's seniority, it's like, okay, it's what it is. Yeah, it might just be that. Yeah.
Great.
Work your lawyers.
Yeah, it's a good solution. Stick around.
I think we're really close on this one. Yeah, well, I just wanted to circle back, and we're pretty short of time, but we would definitely bring this one back next time. It may be that we're there on this one.
Do you want, we don't mind, running out of the room, for a 5-minute caucus if you want 5 minutes, and, you can let us know if you're just looking to adjourn.
You know, Carol, what do you want to take? You want to take a minute and just chat or something?
Yeah, okay. Just a couple of things.
Yeah, okay, why don't we do that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And we're back.
Back.
Right before I give you guys the floor, and I should have done this earlier, we have, a guest that I'd love to announce, over there in red is Jake Mead. Jake is running for Hillsborough City Council. He just received the endorsement of Hillsborough Classified United, and has joined us today, out of his good graces. And, thank you, Jake, for joining us today, but certainly take a moment to talk to him afterwards.
Oh, well.
I'm glad he's here today.
Thanks for being here. Are we live? Good luck in the race. Up there. After some discussion, I think we're, okay with signing off on transportation.
Awesome. Job, everybody.
So we just need two clean copies.
Yeah.
I wrote on.
That's a huge challenge.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Nice.
We'll work on that.
Yeah. Better coordination. I like that. I like it. Yeah, that's good.
Started school year.
They put us with us on there.
This is all.
Oh, we're gonna be friends.
I did.
You got that?
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you.
I love it.
We'll be happy to sidebar, with you about agenda for the next session. I think we don't know necessarily.
Same with us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for a productive session.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, stay cool out there.
Yeah.
It's, oh gosh.
Yes.